Hey there, welcome to Bedtime Chills. Tonight, the wind is soft, thunder rolls in the distance, and for the next 3 hours, creepy stories will keep you company. These tales don't just scare, they stay with you. If the dark gives you chills, hit like, share with someone brave, and subscribe to stay close to the fear. Now tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Type it in the comments. Get cozy, and let the night begin. I'd worked as a police dispatcher for 9 years of my life. It's a career that takes a level of mental fortitude that I don't think many possess. I used to hate saying things like that, always thought it sounded so pretentious, but the truth is, it takes a special type of person to be willing to voluntarily listen to some of the things we have to hear every single day. Don't get me wrong, the job wasn't always grim, and it even had its decent moments. I've got enough decently funny drunk 911 call stories to last me several lifetimes, but the reality of the job was usually far darker. I understood that, though, and felt that I was more than equipped to deal with anything the job could throw at me. And I was right, for a while. For years, I had answered every call, always able to keep a steady head despite being faced with some horrific situations, my confidence in my ability to handle the job unwavering. Until the final call I ever took as a police dispatcher. I glanced at the time displayed in the corner of my computer screen. 11:43. I yawned, leaning back in my chair with my arms extended as I stretched my back. I'd been at the desk since 3 in the afternoon, answering calls and dispatching officers as they were needed, which wasn't very often in this town. I lived in a little port town in Washington, about an hour or so outside of Seattle, and though we weren't without our fair share of crime, our phones never rang off the hook, which meant a lot of free time for me. I was always okay with that. As soul-wrenching as many of the calls could be, moments of respite were always more than welcome. A notification on my screen caught my attention, and in an instant, I had returned to my seat, headset on. 911, what is your emergency? I spoke into my headset as automatically as any line repeated hundreds or thousands of times can be spoken. For a moment, the line was only dead silence before I heard a reply. I need policemen. I think somebody is in my house, a child whispered from the other line. I felt the smallest of knots begin to form in my stomach. I shifted in my seat. Do you know your address? I asked, adopting a firm but gentler tone in response to the caller's age. I heard shuffling and heavy breathing from the other end, followed by a faint, wait. The caller returned and whispered her address. She was a little girl, by the sound of her voice, and she sounded terrified. Good job. What about your phone number? The process repeated, and I quickly relayed her information to dispatched officers. Her address was on the edge of town, a little out of the way, and I understood that it may be a while before help arrived. I stifled a sigh, not wanting to vocalize my worry as I received an estimated arrival time. Is there an adult with you in the house? I continued. No, the little girl replied breathlessly, and I could hear the anxiety rising in her voice as she spoke. My mom works late, and my sister There was a pause, followed by an audible sniffle. She's camping with her friends, and somewhere on her end of the line, there was a crash. Then a scream. My heart dropped. Are you still there? Are you all right? There was a repetitive thumping sound, followed by the slam of a door. I'm here, the little girl spoke breathlessly into the phone. Are you all right? I repeated the question. Yes, she replied, barely above a whisper. Her tone worried me. She sounded more than afraid. Sad? No. Disturbed was the proper word for it. Then she began to cry. Not as quietly as you'd expect given her situation, but a deep, helpless sob that made my heart sink. When she spoke, it stopped altogether. Please, 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 help me. Her sobs turned into a hysterical cry, and I could hear loud, repetitive thumps from her end. Footsteps, and they were clearly not hers. They were heavy. Far too heavy for a little girl. Without warning, a shrill cry, like the sound of microphone feedback, rang through my headset. The sudden assault on my ears caused me to jump, and my heart set off racing like a jackrabbit. I fought the instinct to throw the headset off and instead clenched my eyes shut as the noise faded as suddenly as it had come. I saw it. She sputtered through sobs. Oh, please, please, I don't know what it is. The frantic and frenzied nature of her begging increased, and a strangeness began to settle in the air that I couldn't quite place. A quick glance around the room confirmed that most of the desks around me were empty, and I was on the call alone. The thought made me feel very isolated, and a growing uneasiness took hold of me that I couldn't shake. Something about the call just felt wrong. Police are on the way, I began. I tried to infuse the statement with my usual level of assertiveness and confidence, but I worried that the uneasiness might be audible in my voice. Can you tell me your name? I asked. Amber. All right, Amber, are you, or can you get somewhere safe? A room with a door you can lock? I'm in my room, she said through sniffles, and it was obvious that she had been crying profusely. I locked the door. Good. I'm gonna stay with you on the line. Is there anywhere for you to hide? The sound of footsteps grew louder in the background as her voice lowered to a whisper. I think under the bed, she whimpered. Okay. Is there, I paused, thinking over my words before continuing, anything you can use to protect yourself? There was silence on her end for a moment, followed by a hushed yes as she dropped the phone. I assumed she was reaching for a weapon. The clamor from within the house had grown closer to the phone, and the piercing ringing sound had returned. I was almost certain something was wrong with my headset or with Amber's phone. The sound grew to an almost unbearable extent, matched only by deafening thuds coming from somewhere on the line. It sounded too close. I could feel the hairs begin to rise on the back of my neck, and the ominous sense of panic began to give way to an unexplained fear. The urge to look over my shoulder became harder to fight as the persistent thudding sound grew louder. Nearer. It all sounded too clear, I guess. There was no static, none of the white noise typical of a phone call, nothing. Just the sound of footsteps approaching. Closer. Closer. I gave into my instinct, whipping around in my seat, nearly losing my headset. No one. I had no time to settle my nerves as Amber returned to the line. Are you there? She whispered, yanking me from my fog and back into the moment. Yes, I replied, struggling to shake off my fears. Something was very wrong with this situation. Despite my worries, I shifted my attention back to Amber. There isn't any weapon, the girl muttered, but I have something. There was a pause. Okay, what do you have? I asked, realizing my prompt was necessary. Oh, a rabbit. A pink rabbit, she said, and even over the phone, I could hear a little embarrassment. My dad gave her to me when I was little, she sniffled. He said she would keep me safe. I didn't know what to say for a moment but didn't want to miss a beat. He was right, I said, as encouragingly as I could. Everyone knows pink bunnies are great protection. Can you go back under? I was interrupted. Amber, I miss you. I could hear a man call from within the house. So the intruder knew her? I furrowed my brow. Amber, do you recognize that voice? I asked, hoping she could identify the intruder. There was silence for a moment before a response. It sounds like my dad, Why does it sound like my dad? I blinked. What do you mean? That's my daddy's voice. Why does it have my daddy's voice? I didn't know how to respond to that. Heck, I didn't know what to think. At his voice? Before I could ask what she meant, we were interrupted by a sound. The thing we heard has taken me years to try to understand. I've come to believe it was that things laugh. At the time, though, we couldn't know. It was the sound of metal crunching in a car accident as it met flesh, a wet, grinding shriek that shook me to my core. I wanted to vomit, and my vision began to blur. I can only imagine what it was like for Amber, hearing that all in person. Amber, I panted, my senses returning to me all at once. She barely had time to respond before we heard it. A voice, or voices, calling for her from somewhere nearby. They spoke as one, all with the same odd, inhuman nature, dripping with malintent. Amber. My blood froze. Amber began to cry, her cries eventually becoming pleas as she begged for help, for her life, for her mother, and for my intervention. 5 more minutes. Just 5 more minutes, I muttered, mentally cursing the timer displaying the estimated arrival time of the dispatched officers. I prayed it would be soon enough. It's outside the room, she whispered, her voice filled with utter panic, before breaking into a quiet sob. I silently swore under my breath. Amber, I need you to hide right now if possible. The police are 3 minutes away. Stay as quiet as possible. There was no response, but I assumed from the shuffling sounds I could hear that she had gone back under the bed. For a few moments, there was silence. Then Amber spoke, and my heart dropped. I'm going to die. You are not going to die, Amber, I began, worry now audible in my voice. I promise. It's reaching under the door. Oh my God, she muttered. There was a crash, louder than before, and Amber began to shriek. The noises continued, and it began to dawn on me what I was hearing. It was breaking down the bedroom door. Amber's screams had devolved into horrified babbling and pleas for her life to whatever was on the other side of the door. Her screams were soon drowned out by the same noise as before, that sick, maniacal laughter. What are you? Amber shrieked, loud enough to make my ears ring. Please. What are you? What are you? It mocked, in a voice that was some sick parody of Amber's. Panic gripped me as I glanced back at the corner of the monitor displaying the dispatched unit's arrival time. 1:36. Please God, let it be soon enough. Amber, are you there? I called. Amber? As suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. Somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. I hear them, Amber. Officers are a minute away. Silence. My heart began to sink. Amber, are you there? I could hear something shifting. Breathing. I think it's gone, Amber said. A surge of relief rolled through me, and I let out a sigh, leaning back in the chair. 0:27, the dispatch time read, and the sirens in the background grew louder. You did very well, Amber. Police are almost there. You did really well. I couldn't think of what else to say. I'd never had a call like this, and something about it all felt so strange. Something Amber had said began to ring in my mind. What are you? Amber, I began. What did you see? I was met with silence. Amber? Amber began to laugh. Amber, I said, my voice pleading, a wave of realization crashing down on me. The laughter grew more raucous and less human with every second. Somewhere in the background, there was a knocking sound. They'd finally arrived. Too late. I asked the only thing I could think of at the moment. Why? The laughter stopped abruptly as the thing on the phone spoke. It was fun. There was a click and the line went dead. The house was empty when officers arrived. No signs of forced entry anywhere except the door to Amber's bedroom, the bottom of which had been torn away by something, leaving a wide space to crawl beneath. And Amber, or what was left of her, decorated the room. Whatever had been there left nothing behind to identify it, only carnage. The case was never officially closed, and everyone had their theories as to what had happened that day, ranging from serial killers to a bear attack, and everything in between. The call was never made public, not my decision, but not one I necessarily complained about either. I never want to hear that recording again. I put in my 2 weeks' notice that same night, though I never returned to work after that day. I'd been content to try and forget about that call. As callous as it may sound, I was content trying to forget about Amber, to forget whatever I had spoken to on that phone. But I don't think it's done with me. Last night, I dreamed, or thought I was dreaming, the sounds of footsteps running throughout my house, as something screeched and laughed and mocked me just outside my bedroom door. I stayed in my bed long into the morning despite the sounds having stopped, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and confusion, until eventually I convinced myself to leave the bed. I crossed the room, cursing every creak the floor made under my weight. I lowered myself to the ground, holding my breath as I peered under my bedroom door. There was something there, but it wasn't moving. I mustered up the little bravery I had left and rose to my feet, my eyes shut tight and a prayer on my lips. I pulled open my bedroom door slightly and stuck my head out just enough to see what lay outside. I stifled a gasp, and tears flooded my eyes as I bent over to pick up the object. Placed right outside my door was a little pink bunny, covered in dark stains. From somewhere within the darkness just beyond the bedroom door, Amber's laughter echoed. When I was 12, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that his older brother, Lance, had been killed in a terrible accident. Lance had been caring for my grandmother, and now that he was gone, she was our responsibility. We had to move right away. I knew I should have felt sad for my father's loss, but all I could think about was how I was being forced to leave my school and my friends for some miserable old lady I'd never met. It wasn't fair. I didn't speak to my parents for the entire ride to our new home, but they seemed oddly relieved by that. My father drove in white-knuckled silence, and my mother clutched her forehead, looking out the window at the gusting leaves and dreary skies of our new Midwestern home. The house where Uncle Lance had lived with Grandma was a 2-story, 19th century farmhouse, surrounded by a stone fence and wizened old trees. I was reluctantly impressed by the high, crown-molded ceilings, antique furniture, and aristocratic charm of the place. Living here, I thought, would be like living in a museum. I was afraid to touch anything at first, but I soon found myself testing the winged leather armchairs, rooting through shelves full of old books with strange titles, and exploring the second floor. I'd forgotten all about the move, my friends, and even the old woman we'd supposedly come here to take care of, until I was halted by the first closed door I'd found in the house so far. I swear I heard breathing on the other side. Some instinct made me back up quietly down the hallway and return to the living room, where my parents sat exhausted on a heap of boxes. That closed door at the end of the hall, is that Grandma's room? I ventured. Honey, my mother replied, going pale, you didn't go in there, did you? No. I was just looking around. As I stood, twisting my foot on the huge oriental rug, my father kneeled down in front of me. It's very, very important that you never go into Grandma's room without permission. No matter what you hear or think you see, that door stays locked. Understand? He warned. I understand, I muttered. But I don't get why it's such a big deal. You guys are acting weird. "Your father's just tired, honey," my mother sighed. "Why don't you choose a bedroom and unpack while we get dinner ready, huh?" That was how we came to be sitting around an ornate black walnut dinner table beneath the glow of stained glass lamps, eating macaroni and cheese from plastic bowls. It was almost midnight by the time we finished. My father yawned as he did the dishes. Then, the doorbell rang. "Oh God," my mother whispered. "Is it starting already?" "Stay here." My father hurried to the door. Peering down the hallway, I watched a shadowy figure hand my father a black food delivery case, then return to the van he'd left running. My father rushed the case upstairs like it burned him, a look of disgust on his face. My mother and I listened silently to the creaking footsteps, the jingling of keys, and the groan of a door opening. My father came back downstairs a few minutes later, looking drained. He left the black case on the porch, washed his hands and face several times in the kitchen sink, and announced that he was going to bed. I didn't know it at the time, but that was to be our nightly routine from then on. It's not that I wasn't curious about the grandmother I'd never met. It was just that I had too many other things on my mind, a new school, new friends, a new town to explore. If the thick wooden door at the end of the hallway had to stay closed, for everyone's safety, as my father said, that was fine by me. It didn't affect my life at all, or so I thought. We'd only been in our new home for a few nights when we started to hear scurrying in the walls. Although the house was spotlessly clean and well cared for, it wasn't surprising that the old place was host to some wildlife. It freaked me out at first, that scuffling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I'd lie awake, my eyes scanning the patterned wallpaper, wondering if the creatures on the other side were finally about to claw their way through. My father tried traps and poisons, but nothing worked. In time, we simply got used to it. That's why I wonder if it was the silence that woke me up that night, or the warm weight I felt on my chest. When my eyes popped open and saw 3 other pairs of eyes staring back, I was too scared to move, almost too scared to breathe. I could feel the rats' horrible squirming tails and smell their fetid fur. Even worse, I could understand their squeaks. "Why don't you open the door, sweetie? Grandma's waiting." I screamed. The rats scampered off as lights flickered on and my parents rushed to my room. They seemed relieved that it had only been rats. The invaders left after that, and I soon managed to convince myself that I dreamed the whole thing. As time went on, though, the signs became harder to ignore. If I left a pen on top of my homework while I went to get a drink of water, I'd find come upstairs scrawled across the page when I got back. If I looked in the mirror while brushing my teeth, sometimes my reflection would stop brushing and gesture eagerly toward the door at the end of the hall, a freakishly wide smile on its face. Strange smells and sounds came from the room at the end of the hall. If I was hungry, it was baking cookies or roasting meat. If I was thinking about a boy I liked from school, I'd hear his voice just on the other side of the door. These messages, or whatever they were, took a toll on my mother and father as well. For the first time, money didn't seem to be a problem for our family, and my mother dove headfirst into online shopping, DIY projects, and whatever else she had to do to forget about our bizarre situation. My father, on the other hand, stayed away from the house for as long as possible. He'd come home just before the midnight delivery, and even then, he usually had alcohol on his breath. One night, he didn't come back at all. Ding dong. My mother and I looked at each other, then back at the door. It was midnight, and my father wouldn't have rum. Ding dong. Ding dong. My mother took out a cigarette, since when had she smoked, and gestured toward the door. "You better get that." But, I began. "You'll have to learn to take care of her eventually." My mother shooed at me with a cloud of smoke. "She'll be your responsibility after we're dead." I gulped and opened the door. The face of the man outside was hidden in shadow. A trench coat hid his body, although it was summer. When he held out the black delivery case, the kitchen light made his grin flash like the blade of a knife. The moment I took it, he was gone. "Just do what your father does," my mother said, trying not to look at me. "Take her dinner out of the package and leave it by her bedside. Don't look at what's inside. Hopefully, she'll be asleep. If she's not, don't interact with her. Don't do or say anything at all. Just leave the tray, close the door, and come back downstairs. Got it?" With the package in hand, I made my way to the door at the end of the hall, then remembered, how was I supposed to open it? The doorknob, like the others in the house, was in the shape of a brass lion's head. I reached out for it and winced when I felt something sharp dig into my palm. Had the doorknob bitten me? A trickle of blood ran down the brass handle, but I heard the lock release. I took a deep breath and slipped inside. "Arthur?" A wizened voice called out my father's name. "Is that you?" I'd expected something out of a nursing home, bedpans, beeping machines, the reek of disinfectant, but this room was identical to any other in the house. The same carved bookshelves, ornate rugs, colored glass lamps, and a cozy armchair where an old woman waited expectantly. This must be Granny. She blinked as if surprised to see me. I forced a smile and opened the delivery case. Inside was a tray covered by a stainless steel lid. Just as my mother had instructed, I took it out without looking inside and placed it on the nightstand beside Granny. "Oh!" Granny cocked her head. "You must be Arthur's daughter. It's wonderful to meet you at last. Won't you stay and have a cup of tea? I get so lonely up here, and it would be ever so nice to hear a new voice for a change." My smile became a grimace, but I followed my mother's orders. I backed out of the room with the case in hand and let the door snap shut behind me. My heart was full of doubt as I walked downstairs. Why on earth had my parents locked up this sweet old lady? She was the spitting image of the grandmother I'd always imagined but never known, one with gold-rimmed spectacles and a white bun and a mischievous smile, who wore blue checkered dresses and taught me how to garden, knit, and bake cookies. I told myself that I must be missing something. Maybe Granny Withershins had a weakened immune system, dementia, or some other condition that meant she had to stay inside, but even so. As I trudged down the stairs, the front door flew open. My father saw the black case in my hands, and a look of horror crossed his pale and sweaty face. "You didn't let her," he bellowed at my mother, who was still smoking and staring out the window into the night. She waved her hand. "Honey," my father staggered forward and wrapped me in a bear hug. He smelled like a vodka martini. "I am so sorry. But I have to ask, did you talk to Grandma? Did you take anything she gave you?" "No," I muttered. "That's good, good," my father whispered to himself. "You did great, honey. But you have to remember, you can't trust anything that Grandma says or gives you. For everyone's safety." I understand. But as time went on, I wasn't sure I did. Grandma seemed fine. If anything, it was my parents who weren't right in the head. My mother ignored me. My father was hardly ever around. On the nights he came home late, I took over bringing Granny her meals. Soon, the delivery driver met me with a look of sad recognition, and I no longer even flinched at the drop of blood needed to open the door. I found ways to learn about Granny without explicitly going against my parents' instructions, listening at the door, for example. When Granny ate the whatever it was under the metal cover, she did so with gusto. It was like listening to a pack of hyenas ripping apart a carcass. Sometimes she'd sing or play music, or call to me in a sad, sing-songy voice. In the end, of course, I cracked, like I suppose my father did, and my Uncle Lance, and every member of my family going back who knows how many generations. It was a rainy, miserable Saturday. My new friends had promised to invite me to hang out that weekend, but not one of them even bothered to call. I spent the day wandering through the empty rooms like a ghost until a hot rage began to boil in my chest. Enough was enough. I opened the door to Granny's room. "Oh, back so soon?" she asked. "I'll put the kettle on. Have a seat, sweetie." That she did, using a little hot plate hidden away on a bookshelf. I lowered myself into an armchair, buzzing with questions. Where did Grandma sleep? Where did she go to the bathroom? What did she do all day up here? None of them were exactly polite topics of conversation, though, and I was relieved when Granny set a steaming saucer of tea in front of me and asked me what was wrong. I hesitated. This was my last chance to keep the promise I'd made to my parents by not talking to Granny. But I was fed up with promises and secrets. Fed up with this boring Midwestern town, my clueless classmates, my whole frustrating life. Bring it on. What was the worst that could happen? Everything, I answered. Everything is wrong. The sky didn't fall. Granny didn't suddenly attack me for speaking. Everything was just as before. My grandmother observed me over her glasses as she took a deep draught of tea. I did the same. It tasted of herbs and pure relief, and before I knew it, I was describing how much I'd lost by moving here, my parents' strange behavior, my struggles to fit in at school, and other, more private things that I'd never told anyone, not even my best friend, who was now so far away. The more I drank, the more I talked. Granny asked a question to steer the conversation here or there, but mostly she did something no one had done for me in what felt like years. She just listened. I don't think I stopped until I literally ran out of words, and the sun outside Granny's window was about to set. I think I'd better get going. I got to my feet. Of course. Granny understands. That was such a lovely little chat. I hope you come for another visit soon. I closed the door as quietly as I could. I was so worried about getting caught that I didn't notice the string that I brought with me when I stood up from Granny's chair. It led back under the door, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, it detached from my skirt with a mind of its own. Of course, I wouldn't learn that until later. I was still trying to sneak back downstairs when my father's voice boomed out from my own bedroom. Apparently, he'd been looking for me. "Just what do you think you're doing?" my father snarled. "Nothing," I sulked. "I know where you've been, honey. And I'm afraid you're not taking this seriously. I know how it looks, but I'm your father. You've got to trust me." "Trust you?" I snapped. "I don't even know you anymore." I regretted the words the moment I said them, but there was no going back now. My father hung his head. "This is for your own good." My father stood up to leave my room. "You might hate me now, but at least you'll be around to thank me later. You're grounded for the rest of the month. Home, school, and that's it. No friends, no games, and no more visits with Grandma." It couldn't have come at a worse time. That same evening, one of my classmates called to invite me to a pool party the next weekend. It was obviously going to be the big event of the year, and everyone would be there, except me. I stalked irritably from room to room, with nothing to alleviate the boredom and anger. Little did I know that Granny's thread was off weaving a story of its own. I woke up that night to find something tugging on my bedsheets. I pushed myself up nervously, wary of the rats. It was a doll, a dirty old one-eyed thing with a recorder inside that I'd forgotten about. The doll looked up at me with its single plastic eye and opened its mouth to play a new recording. "You've been ever so kind to me, sweetie. Why don't you come let Grandma out of her room for a bit?" As I sat up, the doll pulled itself onto my bed and waddled toward me. In its empty eye socket, I could see that it was filled with string. The end of the cord trailed off out my door. "If we go out together, Grandma can make your daddy see sense. Then he'll let you go to the pool party." Wouldn't that be fun? It might have sounded great if it wasn't coming from a warped recording in the mouth of an animated doll. I looked frantically around for something to cut the thread. My eyes settled on a pair of scissors on my nightstand. As the doll climbed toward my face, I snagged the scissors and cut its cord. The doll fell lifeless onto my bed. But Granny's string wasn't done yet. After recoiling, it slithered back inside the doll, then coiled around the scissors, yanking them out of my hand and lashing them to the doll's arm. It now held them like a butcher knife. I kicked the doll away, but like a horrible plastic spider, it scrambled back on top of me. The scissor blade stopped an inch from my eyeball as the babyish voice issued an ultimatum. If you let Grandma out, you can keep your eyes. With the doll latched tightly onto my head, I opened my bedroom door. The hallway had been transformed into a tunnel of thread, like the lair of a funnel web spider. The only open path led directly toward the last door at the end of the hallway. I thought about my mother's distant look, my father's drinking, and his obsession with staying out of the house. Had my parents been dealing with stuff like this since we moved in? Hiding it from me so I wouldn't have to endure the horrors that Granny was weaving around us? I barely felt the prick of the doorknob as I stepped inside. "Hello, dear," Granny smiled. "Can you please get this thing off me?" I begged. "I'm afraid not, sweetie. It's there to help you do the right thing." The string that animated the doll, I now noticed, was wrapped around Granny's finger. "Now, hold the door open for Granny now, won't you?" I felt my throat go dry. I stepped back, ready to let Granny through. "Stop!" My father, in his pajamas, fought with the web of string. Granny stood, and as she did, I noticed that the doll no longer moved. The string only had power outside of Granny's room. In here, it seemed, the old lady was powerless. I ripped the awful doll from my head and threw it onto the floor, where it lay, a useless toy. As I sprang back from Granny's room and slammed the door, I heard a monstrous wail from the other side. "I knew she was going to work on you," my father panted. "But she can only hurt us with what we give her or take from that room. In there, she's powerless. She can mess with our senses and manipulate our desires, but she can't hurt us, not as long as we take care of her and keep her in that room." "Who is she?" I asked. "What is she?" "Our cross to bear. Every family has at least one secret. She's ours. Uncle Lance didn't have an accident, did he?" "No," my father sighed. "He didn't." "Arthur," my mother cautioned. "She's old enough. After this nightmare, a bit more won't hurt." My father led me downstairs and opened a password-protected folder on his computer. The files inside were recordings from a security camera fixed on the door at the end of the hall that I'd never noticed before. I finally understood how my father knew that I'd visited Granny. The file my father clicked on was titled Never Forget Abby. Uncle Lance had a stroke. Your Aunt June, his wife, tried to take care of the feeding herself. She didn't know that protection against that thing only extends to her bloodline. Anyone else who goes in there? He didn't need to say more. I could see it in the grainy black and white footage on the screen, my Aunt June dribbling a few drops of her husband's blood on the doorknob to activate it. Crossing the threshold with the black case in hand. Falling as her feet were swept out from under her. Writhing in agony, clawing at the floor as her own insides splattered around her. Making the wide-eyed expressions of a living being being eaten from the feet up. Her last act was to yank the door shut, trapping herself inside with Granny. Aunt June had sacrificed herself to keep that thing sealed away for one more day, just long enough to give us time to arrive and carry out our duty as caretakers. It's been over 10 years since that day, when I learned the truth and took over as caretaker. Since then, my parents have gotten divorced, and stress and fear have driven my father to an early grave. Still, I can't complain. I've gotten used to horrific illusions and unnatural occurrences. Unlike everyone else I know, I can count on a steady balance in my bank account and won't ever need to work for a living. Still, when I walk through town with this crisp chill in the air, I look at the pretty facade of so many houses and wonder about the secrets they might be keeping. I wonder how many people I cross paths with go through life under pressure, knowing that they have to be home for a delivery at midnight. Every night, without fail, I hear a woman crying in our backyard. The first time it happened, my wife woke me up. "Harry, do you hear that?" she asked, in a terrified whisper. Those are 4 words you don't want to hear in the middle of the night. Images of a home invasion raced through my mind, shots fired, our children and my pregnant wife dead in their beds. But when I strained to listen, all I heard was the sound of someone crying. Man or woman, child or adult, I couldn't be sure. Only one thing I knew, it was coming from right under our window. "Is there someone out there?" Emily called from the bed. "I don't know." Despite the sound, when I squinted into the gray shadows, I couldn't see anyone. "I'm going to check," I said, heading for the door. "No. Stay here. We'll call the police." Some people use recordings of babies crying to lure people out. I laughed. "Where'd you hear that? Forensic files?" I swung the door open. "First of all, it's not a baby. Second of all, I won't actually go outside. I'll just take a look. I can't see Jack from the window." I went downstairs, armed with nothing more than a cell phone. But when I shined the light around through the windows, I didn't find anyone. The crying, however, continued. Now it sounded like it was coming from the forest surrounding our backyard, just past the tree line. To me, it sounded like a woman's cries, too restrained to be a child's. From experience with my kids, I know crying usually proceeds to full-out bawling in 10 seconds, and too soft and high-pitched to be a man's. I pulled open a window, cupped my hands, and called out, "Hey, do you need help?" The crying sound stopped immediately, but she didn't reply. No other sounds came from the forest, save for the wind rustling through the trees. "Hello?" I yelled. "Anyone out there?" A beat of silence. Then she started screaming. Blood-curdling shrieks. Over and over. No words, no cries for help. Just screaming. That pushed me into action. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. There's a woman screaming in my backyard. I think she's hurt or in danger. She won't respond to me. My address is XX Petunia Avenue. The stairs creaked as my wife rushed down. "Did you call the police?" I nodded. "Oh my God, what the heck is going on out there?" She kept her hand protectively over her belly, as if to shield her unborn child from whatever horrors lay outside. My hand reached for the glass door. What if someone is killing her? Right now? Or what if she's being abducted, and they'll both be gone by the time the police are here? Emily yanked me back. "No, you are not going out there." "But..." She pulled the door shut and locked it. "You could get killed." Thankfully, the police arrived a minute or two later. As they walked into the backyard, the screaming cut off suddenly. Their flashlights scanned through the trees as they searched, lining the leaves in white. 20 minutes later, they came back empty-handed. "Probably what you heard was the foxes," the officer said. "They've got this crazy mating call that sounds just like a woman screaming. But I heard her crying." "Look it up online," he said, with a smile. "I've been fooled by it too. They sound just like a woman screaming her lungs out. It's insane." By the time we climbed back in bed, The gray light of dawn was spreading over the horizon. When I couldn't sleep, I took the officer's advice and looked up fox sounds. Apparently, they do make a sound that's pretty similar to a woman screaming. Convincing myself that's all it was, I fell asleep. But the next night, it happened again. 4 a.m. on the dot. The soft crying coming from the forest. I called the police again. Yet again, they found nothing. They also warned me not to call them over the crying again unless things got worse. And so, I didn't call them when it happened the next night. And the next. And the next. I chalked it up to the foxes, even though they only made screaming sounds, not crying. I forced myself to fall back asleep every time. We invested in a heavy-duty white noise machine. Bought fans, too, for good measure. Turned everything up to full blast, and for about a week, we all slept like babies. Thankfully, the kids' rooms didn't face the backyard, so they never heard a thing. Then the night of August 24th happened. The night started out well. Emily and I got the kids to sleep early, and we cuddled in bed for a long time, longer than we had in weeks. "Our little Ellie," I said, skimming my hand across her belly. Despite her being 5 months pregnant, there was barely a bump there. "Are you sure you're eating enough?" "I'm fine," she replied, pulling my hand into hers and giving it a squeeze. "I just don't want to gain so much weight, like I did the last 2 times. You know I think you're beautiful at any weight, right?" I asked. "You don't need to do this for me." "I'm not." She smiled and closed her eyes. "I love you, Harry." "I love you, too." We fell asleep in each other's arms, only to be woken a few hours later by the crying. It was louder. Much louder. So loud I could hear it over the white noise. As I tossed and turned my way out of a deep sleep and pulled myself out of bed, I realized why. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from our closet. I immediately shut off the white noise and got out of bed. "Who's there?" I yelled, my hand firmly on my phone, ready to dial 911. No response. Just more halting sobs, shuddering breaths, soft sniffles. "What's going on?" Emily asked, sleepily. "There's someone in the closet." I turned my phone's flashlight on. The light twinkled in the darkness, bouncing off the metal doorknob. "Emily, call the police," I said, advancing towards the door. I heard the soft sounds of the dial tone behind me, then Emily's hurried voice. "We're calling the police," I said. "Tell me who you are." More sobbing. I charged up to the door. I grasped the doorknob. With a deep breath, I twisted and pulled. A terrified woman looked up at me. It was Emily. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her face was wet with a never-ending stream of tears. But it was, without a doubt, my wife. She sobbed over and over as she stared up at me, as if she weren't quite registering who I was. Then I looked down, and my blood ran cold. Her hands rested on her stomach. Her round, protruding stomach. She was visibly pregnant. "Harry?" Emily called from the bed. "Is everything okay?" I looked down at the crying woman. Her sobs were silent now. She just stared up at me, silently, tears in her eyes. "Harry?" Emily said, more insistently this time. I slowly shut the door. My hands were shaking, my legs weak. When I turned around, Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, her brown eyes locked intently on me. "The closet was empty," I said. I walked back over to the bed, nearly fainting in the process, and sat down next to her. I must have just imagined it. "Ah, Harry," she said, wrapping it arm around me. I flinched at her touch. "This whole thing has been stressing you out, huh?" I nodded. 3 knocks on the door broke through the quiet. "Will you go let them in?" "I would, but I'm not dressed," she said with a light giggle, her hands trailing over her silky chemise. I didn't move from the bed. "Harry?" No. There was no way I was leaving her alone in the bedroom while I went downstairs. "I'd go down, but I don't feel so good," I lied. "I think I just need to lie down. Will you handle it?" She paused, staring into my eyes. Then she finally nodded. She got off the bed, pulled on a bathrobe, and headed toward the door. As soon as she disappeared from sight, I ran to the closet. She was still there, the woman who looked just like my wife, sitting on the floor, silently crying. The woman who was my wife. I don't know how I knew she was the right one, I just did. It was something intangible, a gut feeling that I can't put into words. I crouched down and laid my hand on her shoulders. "Emily. Emily, can you hear me?" Her eyes stared blankly into mine. Tears streamed down her face. "What happened to you?" She didn't reply. Voices murmured downstairs. Heavy footsteps resonated through the house. We were running out of time. I grabbed her hand. "You have to come with me. Now." She slowly, shakily stood up. I pulled her out of the bedroom, and we softly entered the hall, making our way to our kids' room. Downstairs, the lights were on. Emily was turned away from us, talking to the 2 policemen in dark outfits. "We can't let her see us." Silence. "Don't make a sound. Don't even." Emily suddenly let go of my hand. She ran. Her footsteps thundered across the hall as she sprinted into our kids' room. "Emily, no!" I whispered. As I ran after her, I glanced down the staircase. Emily was staring at us. So were the police officers. Their hands were on their guns. That's when I realized that Emily hadn't been calling 911 at all. She'd been calling for backup. I dove into our kids' bedroom. My wife was already crouched over Abby and Mark, sobbing uncontrollably. And for the first time since I found her, she was speaking, muttering the same 3 words over and over. "I love you." I helped them out of bed. "Abby, Mark, we need to go. Now." They sleepily followed me toward the door, my wife trailing behind them. I opened the door. Emily stood in front of us. The 2 policemen stood behind her, guns raised. "Run," I said to Emily. It was a risk. A huge one. They could shoot all of us in an instant. But, for some reason, they didn't. We ran down the stairs, and they chased after us. But no shots were fired. We were alive. As we ran out the door, I grabbed our car keys from the hook. Then we were pulling out of the driveway. The 3 of them stood in the doorway, watching us, guns still raised, yet never pulling the trigger. "Abby, Mark, are you okay?" I asked as we pulled onto the highway. "Daddy, what's happening?" Abby asked. "Are we in trouble?" Mark asked. "We're okay now," I said. We reported everything to the police, but by the time they arrived at the house, it was empty. No trace of the woman I called my wife for months. No trace of the 2 police officers either. We quickly sold the house and moved several states away. Emily recovered very slowly, but she didn't seem to sustain any permanent damage. In time, she eventually told me what happened. "It was a few months ago, about a month after we got pregnant," she said, her hands shaking as she picked up her cup of tea. I got up to use the bathroom, and I heard someone outside. Someone crying for help. I went to the back door, opened it, and called out to see if they needed help. Then, I don't remember. I'm so sorry, I said, squeezing her hand. I kept waking up in the woods. Every time I did, I tried to make my way back to you. But all I could do was cry and scream. It was like my mind was too foggy to form words. I must have been under the influence of a substance or something. She squeezed my hand back. All I could think about was you. Getting back to you, and Abby, and Mark. When I found the door unlocked one night, I walked up to our bedroom. And then, I don't remember, but I must have gotten scared because I found myself in the closet, hiding away from you and that woman's voice. Unable to stop crying. I'm just glad you're back, I said, wrapping her in my arms and holding her tight. Now, it's been almost a year since Emily and I got away. While life has been wonderful, and baby Leah is the sweetest thing, a gnawing fear has settled in my stomach. I've tried to ignore it and pass it off as stress. Anxiety. Fear. One of those haunting thoughts born out of terror rather than logic. But the more time that passes, the harder it is to ignore. Our two other kids, Abby and Mark, they haven't grown an inch since we moved here. "911, what's your emergency?" I said as I answered the phone. "There's a bat in my house." A loud scream came over the speaker. "Send someone to come and get it." "All right, ma'am, I'll send animal control over as soon as possible," I responded calmly. The caller thanked me and said she'd be outside waiting. I pressed the button to dispatch the nearest unit. I sat back in my cubicle, doodling with a ballpoint pen on a blank piece of white paper. Being a dispatcher isn't always easy, especially in the middle of nowhere, Montana, with a population of only 500. We get random calls about bobcats, bison, and bears wandering into front yards, teenagers prank calling out of boredom, and of course, the usual hunting-related emergencies. But even those are few and far between. Sometimes, hours pass without a single call, which makes the night shift, especially when you're working alone, feel endless. "Kara?" I heard my straight-laced boss call as he walked down the hallway. "I'm here," I yelled back, still doodling. I heard his staggered footsteps coming my way. "Oh hey," he said, popping his head around the corner. "I'm leaving. Need anything before I go?" "I think I'm good." I held up my now cold coffee. "I'll turn off the rest of the lights then. Have a great night." I heard the hallway lights click off one by one. The fluorescent ones always buzz when they're on. I hated that noise. But somehow, I hated the silence even more. When you're alone in the building at night, your imagination starts to get the better of you. I turned back to the 7 computer screens at my station. One screen showed where all emergency responders were located in real time. I'd been working on memorizing every street name in our district. But at that moment, it was a quiet night. I took a sip of my cold coffee and started jotting down my grocery list for the next day. It was 1 a.m., and the caffeine wasn't doing much anymore. What do I need? I mumbled to myself. I wrote down chicken, vegetables, toilet paper, wine, multiple bottles of wine. I folded the list and slipped it into the pocket of my jeans. Suddenly, a beeping sound rang through my headset. Someone was calling in. I looked up as a name and number flashed on the screen. "911, what's your emergency?" I said clearly. "I need help," said a small child's voice. "What's your name?" "What can I help you with?" I asked gently. "I need help," she repeated. "I can't help you unless you tell me what's wrong," I replied, and then, The line went dead. I immediately dialed the number back, but there was no dial tone. It wouldn't reconnect. I decided to send someone out to check the location. "Jenkins, I need you to respond to 5689 Hickory Valley Road," I said into my headset. "Possible victim." I tried calling her back, but got no answer. "Thanks, Kara. Hope you're having a good night all by your lonesome," he said with a laugh. "What are you going to do all by yourself in that little cubicle of yours? You're such a jerk." "As a matter of fact, I am having a great night." "Keep me updated," I shot back. "Roger that." I leaned back in my chair and turned to the screen on the right. A red dot slowly moved toward the location the call had come from. Then, the dot stopped. That usually meant the responding officer had arrived or was at least close. Our map showed streets, but it didn't pinpoint exact locations. While waiting for Jenkins to call back, I took another sip of coffee and stared at the clock. Each second felt like an hour. Just as I was about to dial him again, all 7 computer screens lit up. 911 dispatch. What's the exact location of your emergency? I looked up. The name and number on the screen flashed again. Olivia Taylor. I tried calling you back, but couldn't get an answer. A responding officer should be there shortly, I said quickly, keeping my tone firm. "Why won't you help me?" she whimpered. I could hear her crying. "We're trying to help you, Olivia. Someone should be there any second, I promise. Can you stay on the line with me?" "Closet. You can find us in the closet." I froze. I could hear another soft whimpering in the background. Someone else was with her. "Olivia, is there someone else with you?" My heart started to pound. "I have to go." "He'll hear me," she cried. "Who will hear you, Olivia?" I asked, but the line went dead again. I checked the map. Jenkins' location hadn't moved. Growing more concerned, I called him. The phone rang several times before he finally answered. "Jenkins," he said, sounding alert. "Oh, thank God," I exhaled. My heart was beating a mile a minute. I got another call from the victim. "What's your ETA?" "Waiting for backup. This place is deep in the woods. There's no road access. We're on foot. Should be just a couple more minutes." I watched as 2 more dots appeared on the screen and started closing in on Jenkins' location. "Call me when you reach the property. She's hiding in a closet, and I believe someone else is there with her. Thanks for the update. I'll call you once I reach the site." He hung up. I needed a moment. I walked down the hallway to the bathroom. As I turned on the light, it flickered in time with my heartbeat. That familiar fluorescent buzz calmed me, just a little. I splashed cold water on my face and stared into the mirror. My usual tan complexion was pale white. My pupils were dilated. "It's going to be okay," I told myself. "It's going to be okay." As I stepped out of the restroom, a beeping noise came through my headset again. I ran back to my desk, assuming Jenkins was giving me an update. But when I saw the caller ID, my stomach dropped. "Olivia, I know this is you. Are you okay?" I looked at the map. The officers are almost there. Less than a minute. No response. "Are you there? Can you hear me, Olivia?" A soft whimper. "It's too late," she whispered. "He's in the room. He heard me." "Who is in the room with you? Please tell me so I can let the officers know." I took a deep breath, determined to stay calm. "He has a gun." Suddenly, I heard a door creak open, then a blood-curdling scream. 2 loud pops rang out. Then silence. No! 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 I screamed, slamming my fists on the desk. Tears ran down my cheeks as I stared at the screen. The computer lit up again. This time, the name read Carlos Jenkins. I took a breath and answered. The victim just called again. We may have a DOA, Jenkins. You took too long. I cried. How has anyone been calling you, Kara? He asked, sounding confused. Don't do this right now. Have you reached the property or not? My voice was shaking. We reached a cabin about a mile off the main road, he said grimly. I hate to tell you this, but everyone's gone. There was a long pause. Oh no, I whispered, rubbing my face until it felt hot. But how could anyone have called me tonight? That's the strange part, Jenkins said. We found 3 sets of skeletal remains. One was a male adult, presumed father. The other 2 were young girls. Judging by the condition, they'd been there for at least 12 months. My chest tightened. The room spun. I nearly passed out. The weirdest thing is, Jenkins added, we found the 2 girls' skeletons in the closet. He paused. But one of them was holding a cordless phone in her hand, like she'd been trying to call for help. I walked home alone last night and narrowly made it out alive. Before I get the kind of lecture I'd expect from my father, let me just say, I know that walking home alone at night is a risky move. I know, especially as a young woman, that it's unsafe. That anything could happen. Okay? I know. That being said, I come from a remarkably safe area. The kind of place where people don't lie awake in bed at night, panicking because they can't remember if they locked their doors. I've stumbled home tipsy more than a few times, only to discover my keys long forgotten in the lock outside the next morning. Nobody really worried, because nothing bad really happened here. At least, not until a few months ago. Up until recently, it wasn't considered all that dangerous to walk alone after dark. I did it pretty often myself. I don't have a car, and the public transportation system here is practically non-existent. I'm saving up to finally get a vehicle, but it's a bit of a vicious cycle. I can't afford a car, and the relative safety it would afford me, so to get one, I have to work. And I'm a bartender, which means late shifts are my norm. There's been a recent spate of killings in my town, the first of its kind, really. A terrifying number of victims have met their end at the hands of a frenzied knife attacker over the past few months. And the murders have been brutal beyond belief. The victims were stabbed to the point of death, and then far past that. Unrecognizable. Complete overkill. At first, there was one murder every few weeks. Then it escalated. Now, sometimes multiple victims are discovered after a single night. All of them were just going about their business, walking home from work, a friend's place, or a late-night grocery run. Many of them died just yards from their front doors. Some were only steps away from safety. We've all had to accept what now seems inevitable. We almost certainly have a serial killer on our hands. With all of that weighing heavy on my mind, I guess you'll understand why I was terrified to find myself stuck on the street, hours past nightfall, and out of options. Surprisingly, I wasn't leaving a shift that night, those I planned for. In fact, I've been carpooling with my coworkers for a couple weeks now. After realizing I was often either working or out during nights when the killer struck, I knew I had to take extra precautions. But last night, I was leaving my boyfriend's, well, ex-boyfriend's, house. We'd gotten into a huge fight. It started with the usual. He's incredibly jealous, aggressively possessive. Despite me being faithful throughout our years together, he never learned to trust me. He's always interrogating me about my phone, convinced that if I don't reply instantly, I must be cheating. He was drunk, belligerent, and relentless. He pointed out several recent gaps in my texts, windows of time where I should have responded, failing to realize those moments were either while I was working or asleep, like any normal person. The fight started around 2 a.m. and ended over an hour later. He smashed my phone and kicked me out, leaving me with no way to call for help. I had no cash and no way to hail a cab even if I wanted to. The buses had stopped running, and the walk to the nearest stop probably would have taken longer than the walk home. I was drunk, alone, scared, and helpless. I considered knocking on a neighbor's door for help but stopped myself. I didn't want to cause a scene. I thought, I'll just walk home. It's only 15 minutes. I've done this plenty of times before. With a renewed, or maybe feigned, sense of courage, I plodded down the steps outside my ex's house and onto the sidewalk. I tried not to think of the serial attacker, but the thoughts flooded in anyway. I couldn't shut them out. And what scared me the most was the killer's preferred victims. It was his lack of preference that worried me most, actually. It sounds horrible to say, but in that moment, I couldn't deny the thought, if he only went for a certain kind of victim, like petite blonde girls, I'd have felt safer. As I continued my walk, I thought back on all of his victims, realizing that there was no common thread to stitch his choice of targets together. There was no neat box I could categorize them into, all in the name of making myself feel safer. Even more horrifying still, several men had fallen victim to the killer, big men who, by all appearances, could put up a fight, yet stood no chance against such vicious knife attacks. Chillingly, that variety in victims communicated one terrifying thing to me. And as I turned down the next street, about halfway through my walk, then, the message became suddenly loud and crystal clear. His motives to kill didn't come from the usual things I'd expect. He didn't hate his mom. He wasn't angry at his first girlfriend for leaving him. He wasn't choosing victims to live out fantasies of vengeance against those who had wronged him. He killed for one reason, and one reason alone: he loved to do it. With that realization, I found myself walking at a brisk pace, much quicker than usual. Before the onslaught of brutal killings, I used to enjoy my walks home. I used to savor the quiet of the town after dark. It felt like the world belonged to me, like everything had slowed down for my enjoyment alone, as if I were the only person left on the planet. But last night was different. A slight difference, but one that made a monumental impact. In my mind, I wasn't the only person anymore. Instead, it was just me and the knife-wielding fiend, hell-bent on my destruction. Just the hunter and its prey. I tried to silence those thoughts. I tried, in vain, to reassure myself that we hadn't seen an attack in a little over 2 weeks. For a few moments, those internal reassurances actually worked. Perhaps it was the buzz I still had going. I felt myself start to calm, though I remained vigilant. I had to be. My senses were on high alert so that I wouldn't be caught off guard. It was probably because of that heightened awareness that I heard the sound from behind me, the first sign that proved I was far from alone, just as I had feared. Before I'd even fully registered the disturbance, my head whipped around instinctively to look over my shoulder. It was hard to see at first. But once I noticed the slightest quiver of movement in the distance, my stomach dropped. There was a man behind me, dressed head to toe in black. He was walking quite quickly, with purpose. And I wasn't about to stick around and find out what, exactly, that purpose was. I felt frozen in place for a moment. But once my body caught up with my mind, I was on my way, moving further down the street. I was only a couple blocks away from my house at that point, and my feet carried me as fast as they could. But my shoes were uncomfortable, and I found it hard to move freely. I could still hear him shuffling behind me, his footfalls coming at a disturbingly fast pace. From the sound alone, I figured I'd hardly expanded the gap between us. He was in quick pursuit. I wagered a second glance over my shoulder. Big mistake. Like something straight out of a horror movie, I toppled over. Reflexively, I threw my hands out in front of me, my palms making harsh contact with the cold pavement. But I knew I had to get up, because his steps were growing louder. And I began to panic as I realized that it wasn't just because he was getting closer. It was because he had started to run. Fast. Adrenaline surged through me, urging me to scramble to my feet and get home, or at least to get help. I don't think I was even in control of my body anymore. I'd relinquished all operating power to my most basic, primal self, commanded only by the will to survive. And that must be true, because I startled awake this morning, at home. I woke up in bed, naked, hungover, with a foul taste in my mouth that took brushing my teeth 3 times to get rid of. I'm a little worn out, but I'm safe. I don't look much like I was in a fight for my life, just some scrapes and bruises here and there. My fingernails, though, are surprisingly dirty, with some substance caked underneath them. Probably dirt from when I fell. It's hard to say exactly what happened. The adrenaline rush that hit me was so intense that I only have a hazy recollection of the entire night. That, combined with the alcohol, left me with fragmented memories at best. My survival instincts must have carried me those last few minutes until I burst through my front door. It was a close call, for sure. But it became even closer when I opened my laptop to a news alert. Apparently, a morning jogger found a man's body, another victim of the killer. There aren't many details available just yet, but he was found on the same street I'd been pursued on last night. Likely to have been killed near the same time I escaped. One of the detectives on the case reported that identification may be difficult because the victim had been nearly ripped to shreds. Like I said, I don't exactly remember what happened last night. But I'm comforted by the fact that I was so close to death and still made it home safe. I'm exhausted, and I certainly look a little rough. But I'm okay. And that's something to be grateful for, don't you think? My last shift as a bartender. Chef prepared the best Italian food in the city. I always considered myself fortunate to work at his establishment. Our restaurant, Palermo's Italian Restaurant, has been open for more than 30 years. The owner started it as a family business. He and his brother opened the restaurant together, but a dispute about the style and direction of the place quickly dissolved their relationship, and the brother left. Chef has owned and operated the restaurant alone for at least the past 25 years. He was the best, always cooked and served each dish to perfection. He wore a traditional chef's coat, always crisp and clean. I enjoyed working for him, although my coworkers would likely disagree. I won't lie, he was a jerk. His perfectionism and incredible culinary abilities inflated his ego. Fortunately, as the bartender, I only interacted with him when I needed food for my customers. Anyway, enough background. This is the story of my last shift at Palermo's Italian Restaurant. I spent most of the afternoon sipping coffee, cleaning my apartment, and smoking cigarettes. It was a dreary Saturday, light rain showers scattered across the sky. I love those days, actually. I prefer dark, wet afternoons over sunny ones. After browsing my favorite websites, I noticed my shift was approaching. My hours were from 3 to 11. I loved tending bar. It was great money for a young adult without a college degree. I worked Friday through Monday nights and attended classes Tuesday through Thursday. After a quick shower, I dressed in my work uniform, black non-slip dress shoes, black slacks, a black dress shirt, and a solid red necktie. Then I headed into work, ready to make a decent amount of money for a guy my age. Little did I know, it would be my last day. I arrived a few minutes before my shift. Palermo's Italian restaurant is a large establishment with virtually no parking. On a busy night, customers usually parked at the Regions Bank next door since space was limited. The bright neon Palermo's sign shone in deep red, with a glowing green insignia of grapes. The restaurant is divided into 3 main sections: the main dining room, which separates the bar from the kitchen, the middle room, which separates the large private celebrations room from the main dining area. It's an old building, with even older artifacts hanging on the walls, along with dated tables, booths, and chairs. Palermo's was desperately in need of renovation, but Chef never updated anything. My shift began like any other. I filled the ice bin, set up the sinks, stocked the beer cooler and wine cabinets, and completed all the other opening tasks for the bar. Saturday nights were usually slower than Fridays, so I didn't prep for a huge crowd. As the first few hours passed, coworkers and customers trickled in, but my bar remained empty. Then he walked in. He was new to me. I've been trained to treat every new customer as a potential regular, so I always try my best to make a good impression. But something about this man wasn't right. He had a strange energy, like he was hiding something. "Hi, how are you doing today?" I asked with a smile. He looked at me for a long moment without answering. Just stared. Studied me. After an awkward pause, he finally spoke. "Whiskey and Coke, tall?" "Sure thing," I said, prepping his drink. I grabbed the mixing tin and a highball glass, scooped in some ice, and poured 1.5 ounces of whiskey. Then I filled the glass with Coke from the soda gun. As I made the drink, I tried to keep things friendly. "I don't think I've had the pleasure of serving you before. Is this your first time here?" He continued staring as I set the drink in front of him. "Yes." "Great," I thought. A quiet jerk. Over time, I'd learned how to read people. If someone's chatty, a good bartender listens and smiles. If they're shy, you try to draw them out. If they're cold or distant, you let them drink in peace until they're ready to talk. Most people don't realize bartenders aren't just servers, we're unlicensed therapists. We listen, offer support, and even share your pain. We mirror you, just enough to make you feel heard. But for us, customers are clients, not friends. But this guy, he was unsettling. As the night progressed, his presence grew more unnerving. Hours passed. I continued serving drinks to the main floor patrons, making them laugh and giving them good service. A few people came into the bar and eventually left. But the strange man remained. He never spoke, just watched. I could feel his eyes on me. Constantly. He gave me a creepy vibe. Eventually, the bar emptied out. My customers left. Some of my coworkers clocked out. But he stayed. Still staring. He was on his 4th drink when he finally started talking. The questions he asked were weird. A little too personal. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. A few years now," I replied. "Have you had any problems working here?" "Yeah, people like you. What the heck is your problem?" I thought. Not really. Some of my coworkers have, though. He kept staring, like he expected more. Our boss can be a little rough around the edges. A lot of people find it hard to work for him. That's probably why our turnover rate is so high. Now stop asking me weird questions. Why does this feel like an interrogation? What's your boss like? So I told him about Chef, his history, the restaurant, and then I mentioned the veal parmesan. That got his attention. Chef makes this incredible veal parmesan, but it's not on the menu. It's the best food I've ever tasted, truly amazing. But he only makes it for himself and the employees. How often does he make it? Every few months, I guess. Everyone loves it. He says if we work hard, it's our reward. Anyway, excuse me for a second. I need to check on something, I said. He was asking way too many strange questions. I needed a break. I slipped out the back door and lit a cigarette. Is this guy a stalker? Why is he so weird? After a few minutes, I headed back inside. I walked through the dining room and he was gone. Relief washed over me. I cleaned up his area at the bar and found a $100 bill. His tab was only $32. It was a huge tip, but I still felt uncomfortable. The shift ended and I finished closing the bar. But that man stayed on my mind. Such a strange person. As I walked out into the parking lot, I saw him standing next to his car. You've got to be kidding me. I immediately jogged to my truck and drove off. I kept checking my rearview mirror, paranoid he might be following me. But I didn't see anyone. It was dark, though. When I got home, I downed a 12-pack of Stella Artois. I fell asleep, completely wasted. When I woke up, I had several missed calls and texts. All from coworkers. For some reason, the first thing that came to mind was him, the man from last night. Then I checked my voicemails. That's when I learned the truth. Chef had been arrested. The man from the bar? He was an undercover detective. Apparently, Chef had murdered over a dozen of my coworkers over the years. And that famous veal parmesan? It wasn't veal. I don't think I'll ever eat Italian food again. You know what they say, children have overactive imaginations. Well, some people say children are just more attuned to the paranormal, but that's nonsense. What I'm about to tell you isn't nonsense. It really happened. My name is Jake. When I was young, I was always ill at ease, constantly looking over my shoulder. I would always check under my bed and inside my closet before going to sleep. I believed then, and still do, that the only thing we can ever know for certain is what's right in front of our eyes. And even our eyes can sometimes deceive us. My mother would always tell me the same thing. There's nothing under your bed, sweetheart. Go to sleep. But I knew she was wrong. I could feel it, a presence. A gentle breeze or a shadow shifting in the periphery of my vision. I could feel it watching me while I was in bed, doing homework, or watching TV. Lurking in the dark corners of my room. Hiding. Ever present. Always just out of sight. Watching. I wasn't crazy. I was just observant. Kids are always scared of monsters under the bed, but to my parents, my absolute conviction was too much. I begged them. I pleaded with them to believe me. But it was no good. They took me to a psychiatrist. Take these twice a day, she said. Take them with some water. I complied, knowing full well the pills wouldn't make the monster go away. This thing didn't care how many medications I swallowed. I was never able to get a good look at it. But here's what I assumed at the time. It must have been very tall, as it often watched me for long periods through my second-floor bedroom window with ease. It had to be thin, spindly, and flexible, because it could compress itself into very small spaces. And it must have been fast, because it was always able to slip away just as I turned my head. Both of my parents worked during the day, and I would get home from school to an empty house. That's when it would stalk me the most. The hairs on the back of my neck would prickle. I would feel it behind me. I'd spin around, but it would vanish from sight at just that moment. One evening, I snapped. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. I screamed at the empty air in front of me. I hate you. Stop following me. Stop watching me. Leave me alone. I was never a very articulate kid. That night, when I went to bed, I was afraid. Afraid that maybe it would retaliate. I thought it might attack me, or kidnap me, or worse. But eventually, I drifted off. My sleep was restless, filled with nightmares. It did do something. When I awoke, there was a scrap of paper on my desk. In thick gray lettering, it had penciled a single word. Hello. The handwriting resembled my own, ill-formed and childlike. Just one word. It might not seem like much, but I had made contact. What was I supposed to do? Show it to my parents? They wouldn't believe me. So I went to school like normal. I told my friends. Some believed me, some didn't. We started calling it the Watcher. It became our little urban legend. I kept that paper. In a way, it was comforting. Proof. I wasn't crazy, the Watcher was real. And even though the idea of being watched constantly made my skin crawl, at least it didn't seem to want to hurt me. Over time, I got used to it. When I was home, I would talk out loud to it. It never replied, I don't think it could, and it never showed itself. But I knew it was listening. Over time, I received more notes. Most were indecipherable, charts filled with strange symbols, circles, lines. Diagrams clearly trying to communicate something. But for the life of me, I couldn't understand them. Still, I kept them. I stuffed them all into a drawer. I told my mom not to throw them out. Reluctantly, she agreed. At first, she was worried. But I think she was just relieved I'd gotten over my fear of monsters. The next few years were rough. I pushed the Watcher to the back of my mind. School got harder. Most of my friends moved away or transferred. I began to feel alone in a way I hadn't before, Watcher or not. And then the bully noticed. There's always one, isn't there? His name was Josh. Burly, but chubby, with greasy curls and a face like he'd just collided with a wall. He was taller and broader than me. My reputation as the school weirdo had long been solidified. And now, I had no one left to defend me. Josh and his little gang made my life miserable. They beat me up during lunch, mocked me from the back of the classroom, called me names, spread nasty rumors. I tried to avoid them, but it was useless. They followed me. They stalked me. The teachers did nothing. Don't be a tattletale, they said. They might as well have been on Josh's side. One day, I came home in tears. I sat on my bed and sobbed. Everything felt like it was falling apart. When my mom got home, she hugged me and whispered, "Don't let them get to you, sweetheart. Just ignore them, they'll go away." But I knew better. They weren't going anywhere. My mom drove me to school the next morning. Aaron greeted me excitedly at the front gate. Aaron was in my class. He wasn't really a friend, more of an acquaintance. He was kind of short, and he wore thick black glasses. He lived across the street from Josh. Josh bullied him as well. "Jake, you're totally not gonna believe what happened," he said to me. I remember he was practically hyperventilating. I didn't respond. I didn't care anymore. "Josh is dead," he said. At first, I thought he was messing with me. But it was real. He got turned inside out. Inside out? His outsides were on the inside, and his insides were on the outside. There was blood everywhere, and there were police cars outside his house. It really was true. It ended up on the local news. Although, they didn't mention the part about him being turned inside out. A smile spread across my lips. I knew exactly why Josh was dead. The bullies didn't bother me after that. Thank you, I said to the watcher. Looking back on it, I still think Josh probably deserved to die. He was a terrible person. He just would have grown up to be a substance addict or something. The watcher left me more notes. I am from far away. I must record. I like you. Through my adolescence and early teens, the notes gradually became more sophisticated. The watcher said that it was from far away, but would never say where. I asked a few times if I could see it, but it left a note that just said, no. It seemed like it wasn't able to communicate through conventional means, but it was able to learn English after years of watching me do the same. It said that it was sorry for scaring me and making me feel uneasy, but also that it must watch always. From what I can gather, the watcher lived in a world where there is no conflict. There were no wars, no fights, not even so much as an argument. But it seems like there was also no art, no music, and no literature. Life in the watcher's world had no lows, but it also had no highs. Because, without lows, there can't be highs. You can never really appreciate happiness until you've been truly miserable. The watcher was always there. Through the good times and the bad, it watched. And it listened. And it helped. And, because of the watcher, I was never truly alone. I will forever be in its gratitude. One morning, when I was in my mid-teens, I woke up. And it wasn't there. I had grown so accustomed to it, I knew immediately that it was gone. There was a note on the desk, beautiful, impeccably neat handwriting. Dear Jake, I have to leave you now. I'm sorry that I didn't tell you until today. I'm sorry that we couldn't say our goodbyes face to face. I had been putting it off for a long time. I suppose you have one question. Why? We found the signals you broadcast into space. We found the pictures and the music. We found the anatomical and chemical diagrams. And we found all the other images you had left, images of natural beauty, images of humanity, images of life and love and death. From tiny insects to sea mammals to humans. From tall mountains to deep oceanic trenches. We pored over every minute detail. We saw the immense diversity of your cultures. We saw sport and cuisine and science and architecture, industry and art. We saw a world that was not unlike our own. For one brief moment, our entire civilization was united. You had touched us with your electromagnetic waves, and you had made us feel and see things that we had never felt before. We had never before seen the true beauty and raw emotion that humanity shared with us. From then on, we had one singular goal. We would find Earth. We would collect data. And then, when we were ready, we would initiate contact. Experiencing your life firsthand has been a true privilege, and I thank you for everything that you have given to me. One day, we will return. But by that time, you will be long dead. Goodbye, Jake. And take care. The Watcher. It was difficult to adjust to life without it. I had lost my oldest childhood friend. But eventually, I did. And I went on living. I graduated high school and was accepted to study math at a prestigious university. I'm currently studying for my master's degree. My mom moved out of my old childhood home recently, and I found the notes that the Watcher had left me stuffed away inside an old chest of drawers. I realized what the diagrams were. They're star charts. I took the charts to the astronomy department and asked them to take a look. It took a while, but we decoded them. They point to an Earth-sized planet orbiting a star in the Lambda Algira system. Research into Lambda Algira is ongoing, but many astronomers believe that it could potentially harbor extraterrestrial intelligence. Only I know for sure. I don't know where else to turn. I can't talk to my mom about this, she's already a wreck. I can't talk to my dad because, well, he's the reason I'm writing this. I did something, and I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was saving him. But now, the house is filled with a silence that is so much worse than the screaming I wish I could hear, and I see the look in my father's eyes, and I know I've made a terrible, terrible mistake. I need help. I need someone to tell me what I need to do. We live in a nice house, the kind of place people move to when they want a family. A big yard, a picket fence, flower beds my mom fusses over. It was a normal, happy place to grow up. Until the tree. It all started about 15 years ago. I was 10. My dad came home from work one day absolutely buzzing with an energy I'd rarely seen. He was a quiet man, a decent man. He worked a steady job in logistics, and his passions were small and manageable. He loved gardening, it was his escape. On this day, he was holding a small, wrinkled paper bag. "Look at this," he said, his eyes shining as he showed me a single, gnarled, black seed. It was the size of a pigeon's egg, strangely heavy, and covered in faint spiral patterns. Got it from a street vendor downtown. An old fella. Said it was special. Said it would grow into a great tree, a king in our yard. Said it would cast its shadow over the whole house and protect us. I was 10. I thought it was cool. My dad was a sane, rational man, but he always got a bit poetic when he talked about his garden. I just figured he was exaggerating to make his only kid excited. We planted it together in the center of the backyard. It was a good memory. One of the last purely good ones, I think. The tree grew. And it grew fast. Faster than any tree has a right to grow. Within a couple of years, it was already taller than me. My dad was ecstatic. He tended to it like it was some kind of deity. He built a small, neat wooden fence around its base, not to keep animals out, but, it seemed, to designate its space as sacred. No one else was allowed to water it. No one else was allowed to prune it, not that it ever seemed to need it. It was his. For years, my mom and I just accepted it. It was Dad's hobby, his thing. When he was out in the yard, kneeling by the tree, we knew that was his time. We didn't interfere. We didn't think much of it. But the tree kept growing. And as it grew, my dad started to change. Subtly, at first. He'd spend more and more time out there. He'd come in for dinner with dirt under his fingernails and a distant, peaceful look on his face. He started talking about the tree not as a plant, but as a presence. The tree is well today, he'd say. It enjoyed the rain. We'd just smile and nod. By the time I was in my early 20s, the tree was a monster. It was a species none of us recognized. Its bark was a smooth, dark gray, almost black, and its leaves were a deep, waxy green that seemed to drink the sunlight. It towered over our 2-story house, casting a vast, profound shadow over the entire backyard for most of the day. And that's when we really started to notice the wrongness. The first sign was the other plants. My mom's prize-winning roses, the vegetable patch, the cheerful little flowers she planted every spring, anything that fell under the tree's shadow for more than a few hours a day would wither and die. The soil beneath it became barren, gray, and hard as rock. Then, the animals. Birds stopped nesting in our yard. The squirrels that used to chase each other across the lawn vanished. Even our family dog, a golden retriever, would refuse to go into the backyard. He'd stand at the back door, whining, his tail tucked between his legs, refusing to set a single paw in the shadow. But the worst change was in my father. His obsession became his entire existence. He quit his job. He said he needed to be home to attend to the tree. He'd spend all day, from sunrise to sunset, sitting on a small bench he built directly under its densest branches. He just sat there. Sometimes, we'd see him from the kitchen window, his head tilted as if he were listening to something. Sometimes, his lips would move, and we knew, with a certainty that made us sick, that he was talking to it. My mom and I tried to reach him. We pleaded. We begged. "Honey, please," my mom would say, her voice breaking. "Come inside. Eat something. You look so thin." He'd just shake his head, a slow, placid smile on his face. "I'm not hungry. The shadow is enough. It's so peaceful here. It comforts me. It can comfort you, too, if you just come and sit with me." We never did. There was something about that shadow. It wasn't just a lack of light. It felt cold. It felt heavy. It felt hungry. Standing at the edge of it felt like standing at the shore of a deep, dark ocean. You knew you shouldn't step in. The last few weeks were the breaking point. He stopped coming inside at all, except to sleep in his chair in the living room for a few fitful hours. He was wasting away. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes sunken, but they held a serene, vacant glow that terrified me more than any anger could have. He was being consumed. The tree was eating him alive, and he was letting it. I decided I had to do something. I had to save him. The tree had to go. I waited until nightfall. I watched through the window until he finally, reluctantly, came inside and slumped into his armchair, falling into his usual restless sleep. The house was silent. My mom was asleep upstairs. This was my chance. I grabbed the heavy wood-splitting axe from the garage. My hands were sweating, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. I stepped out the back door. The yard was bathed in the pale, ethereal light of a full moon, but the ground beneath the tree was a pit of absolute blackness. I stepped into the shadow. The cold was immediate, shocking. It wasn't a natural cold. It was a deep, draining chill that seemed to pull the warmth directly from my bones. I walked to the base of the tree. Its smooth, black bark felt strangely slick to the touch, almost like skin. I raised the axe. As the metal head touched the bark, I heard it. A whisper right beside my ear. A voice that was both male and female, old and young. It was a rustle of leaves, a sigh of wind, and a voice, all at once. "Don't." I stumbled back, my heart seizing in my chest. I looked around wildly. The yard was empty. I had to have imagined it. It was the wind. It was my own fear talking back to me. It had to be. I steeled myself, spat on my hands, and swung the axe with all my might. Thwack. The sound was dull. Wet. Not the sharp crack of axe on what I was expecting. It felt like hitting a side of beef. The axe bit deep into the trunk. I wrenched it free, and a dark liquid, black in the moonlight, began to ooze from the gash. I ignored it. I swung again. And again. And again. I fell into a frantic, desperate rhythm, sweat pouring down my face, my muscles screaming. The wet, fleshy thud of the axe, the splatter of the dark sap, the deep, draining cold of the shadow. It was a nightmare. With every swing, views from the gash flowed more freely. The coppery, metallic smell of it filled the air. It was a smell I knew, a smell that had no business being here. It was the smell of blood. I touched the sticky liquid with my fingers, brought them to my nose. It was blood. Thick, dark, real blood. Panic, stark and absolute, seized me. I wanted to run. I wanted to drop the axe and flee and never look back. But then I thought of my father, of his vacant, smiling face, of him wasting away on his bench. I couldn't stop. I had to finish it. I screamed, a raw, wordless sound of rage and fear, and I put everything I had into the last few swings. The gash widened. The tree groaned, a deep, shuddering sound that seemed to shake the very ground. And then, with a final, tearing shriek of splintering matter, it fell. It crashed into the yard with a ground-shaking boom, its great branches shattering my mom's empty flower pots. Silence. The shadow was gone. I was panting, leaning on the axe, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. My eyes were drawn to the stump, to the place where I had cut it. I pulled the small flashlight from my back pocket and aimed the beam at the wound. The inside of the tree wasn't wood. It was a chaotic, fibrous mass of what looked like dark red muscle and pale, glistening sinew, all woven around a central, horrifying core. Where I had cut the tree in half, I had also cut it in half. Embedded in the center of the trunk, integrated into its very being, was the torso of a human being. I could see the curve of the ribcage, the shape of the spine, the pale, rubbery look of preserved flesh. I had cut it clean through. The dark blood was still pouring from it, soaking into the ground. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. My mind simply stopped. What was this? Who was this? Was this what my father had been talking to? Burn it. The voice came from behind me. It was quiet, raspy, and broken. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting wildly through the darkness. My father was standing at the edge of the patio. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the fallen tree, at the mangled, bleeding stump. And the expression on his face, it was the most profound, gut-wrenching sadness I have ever witnessed. The vacant serenity was gone, replaced by a grief so deep it looked like it had cracked his very soul. "Dad?" I whispered. "We have to burn it," he repeated, his voice hollow. "All of it. Now." We worked together in a grim, silent ritual. We hacked the branches and the great trunk into manageable pieces. We dragged them into a pile in the center of the yard. My father moved like an old man, his newfound clarity costing him all his strength. He never once looked at the horrifying thing at the heart of the trunk. We doused the pile in gasoline, and my father threw the match. The fire went up with a roar, a greasy, black smoke that smelled of burning meat and something else. Something acrid. Something deeply wrong. We stood there for hours, watching it burn, until the great tree that had dominated our lives was nothing but a pile of glowing embers and a scorched black circle on the lawn. I thought I had saved him. I thought I had cut out the cancer that was killing him. But I was wrong. It's been a week. The tree is gone. The shadow is gone. My father, he's inside. He eats what my mom puts in front of him. He sleeps in his own bed. He's physically present. But he's not here. The obsession is gone, but the peace, twisted as it was, is gone too. It's been replaced by a constant, humming anxiety. He paces the house. He stares out the window at the empty space in the yard. He jumps at every unexpected sound. He doesn't speak. Not a single word since that night. He just looks at me sometimes with those haunted, broken eyes. And I feel like I'm the monster. I destroyed the thing that was consuming him, and in doing so, I seem to have destroyed him, too. I traded a smiling zombie for a silent, terrified ghost. What was that thing? What did I do? And how do I fix my dad? Is there any way to bring him back from whatever edge I pushed him over? Please, if anyone has any idea what happened here, tell me. The silence in this house is getting louder every day. All this started when I got up to some of the usual, fresh out of high school shenanigans by making a plan with my girlfriend to hook up and have a private night to ourselves in her dad's cabin at the lake. The plan was simple. I'd tell my parents I was going up to my grandparents for the weekend. I'd leave home on Friday, show up to the cabin that same day, and me and my girlfriend could have Friday afternoon and pretty much all of Saturday to ourselves. We also had a few other bases to cover. She'd tell her mom she was with her dad, and vice versa. I was kinda skeptical of this, but she assured me they wouldn't talk to each other to check in due to a really nasty divorce, and her bouncing between the two was normal and wouldn't be questioned. I'd call my parents and grandparents and say I was stopping at a friend's house halfway, and if either questioned why I never showed up, I'd say I fell asleep and would stay the night. Of course, I checked with my friend, and he said he was fine with being an alibi, so it was set. Thinking back on it, the plan was a lot more complicated than it needed to be. I could have just said I was staying at his house for the weekend, but hey, hindsight is 20/20. It was about an hour away from both of our parents in different directions, so it was kinda out of the way. But that's an easy obstacle to get past when something so attractive is in your grasp. I said my goodbyes to my parents and started the drive in my dad's old truck. I don't know if I should have mentioned this earlier on, but I guess now's the time to do it. I'm a bit of a paranoid mess. Not in the schizophrenic way or anything, just kinda worried. Nervous that anything could go wrong. Constantly keeping an eye out for signs from the universe, or God, to do the right thing. This, paired with a shaky plan for debatably the worst thing I've done, wreaked havoc on me. I know what I did wasn't that bad, but it seemed like I was constantly being given chances to turn back or to reconsider my choices. Wrong turns, GPS bugging out, or a car stopped in front of a house that I had to pull around. Every open driveway seemed like an invitation to turn around. Everything went according to plan. I met her there, and we did what you can imagine a teenage couple would do alone at a cabin. I got a call at around midnight asking where I was and if I was going to show up. After that was dealt with, it was smooth sailing. It wasn't until 2 o'clock in the morning that she finally checked her phone, and to her horror, it was a message from her dad. He said that he'd be going to the cabin with her stepmom early in the morning, around 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, so they could get an early start. He would swing by her mom's to pick her up in the morning. This immediately sent us into panic mode. We'd have to clean up the cabin as if no one had been there, and go our separate ways. She'd go to her mom's apartment and either sneak in or stay in the parking lot until her dad came to pick her up, and I'd go ahead and drive to my grandparents, either sneaking in or waiting outside like her. We put everything back as it was, said our goodbyes, and we both went off into the dark. I was on a stretch of an old highway alone, nervous as hell that I'd be discovered as I pulled up and had to explain why I was showing up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I tried to push that out of my mind and focus on the road and the directions on my phone's GPS. All I had to do was make it to my exit, and then I knew the way from there. It was just supposed to be 15 minutes, then I'd be at my exit. I counted every minute, every mile. It wasn't there. Just an unending stretch of guardrail and an impenetrable forest. I couldn't have missed it. I didn't know this old highway well, but I knew that the exit should have been there. I looked down at my phone to check and see if I somehow missed it, or if I was even on the right road. It was dead. Completely bricked. The screen saying it needed to be charged wouldn't even pop up, and it didn't respond to being plugged in. I was screwed. I seemingly had no idea where I was, and there wasn't a thing in sight. Not a single sign, exit, building, or hell, even a broken down car. It was just nothing. The same unending stretch of road. Not that it was repeating itself, but it all looked the same. I went down that road for hours. It seemed, hell, it might have been. I had no way of telling the time. Just that same stretch of road in my headlights, and the black night sky. I was lost and sick to my stomach with pure dread at the thought of being stuck on this highway until daybreak. My mind started to wander to every bad thing that could happen. I could run out of gas, or the truck could break down, or I could hit a deer. If any one of those things happened, I'd be more screwed than I already was. I'd be stuck walking this road, looking for help. Then I'd have to explain why I was in the middle of nowhere, this late, to my folks. Then I saw a glimmer of illuminated hope in the distance. Street lamps all along the highway. I had a small wave of relief wash over me, with the hope that there might be a sign or somewhere nearby to let me at least know where I was. The relief didn't last long. The street lamps seemed just as endless as the guardrails and trees that surrounded them. Not a single thing in sight. Even though it was really late, or early, depending on how you looked at it, there wasn't a single car. I hadn't seen a single car since I pulled out of that stupid driveway. Nothing but the trees, the guardrail, and now these endless lamps. I was getting increasingly more frustrated, on top of every other feeling I'd been dealing with. I was still sick to my stomach, with a pit of dread in my chest. I was sweating, but rolling down the windows didn't do anything except blow my hair around and piss me off more, so I kept them up. My nerves were shot at this point. I just wanted out. The radio burst to life with a near-deafening static noise that filled the whole cab. I tried to turn it down or find another station, but it was stuck. A surge of anger built up in me, and I punched the radio twice in an impotent attempt to shut it up. I wiped my face and tried to collect myself, but looking out at the road, I noticed the endless stretch of street lamps starting to dim. The radio grew quieter and quieter as the lights faded. Then there was darkness and silence. Just my headlights and the hum of the truck. It scared me, brought on a feeling of dread I didn't even know was possible. Just my headlights, the hum of the truck, trees, the guardrail, and the now defunct street lamps. It stayed like that for a few minutes, enough time that I started to get used to it, even though I hated every second. All at once, the static from the radio erupted back at full force as all the streetlights lit up in a sinister blood-red glow. I was exhausted, and the most scared I'd ever been in my entire life. I knew I had to get out of there, some way, somehow. I reviewed my very limited options. The thought of getting out and cutting through the woods occurred to me, but I quickly brushed it off as a stupid non-solution to my problem, one that was probably 10 times worse. I could turn around. This highway wasn't taking me anywhere at this point, and I could hopefully get back to civilization, at least, even if it meant turning up at her dad's cabin early in the morning. Worst case scenario, I run out of gas heading back the way I came, but to me, that was better than running out heading toward nothing. I started to slow down to get ready for a U-turn, but just as I was about to start turning, I noticed the lights behind me going out, one by one, each going dark about every second. A consuming darkness was swallowing the red lights, and it felt like a monster rushing to tear me apart. I stepped on the gas. I wasn't going to get caught in that darkness. I knew, somehow, that it would be the end of me. It was evil, just like the red lights. It was far off, but not too far. I'd like to give a rough estimate, but I could never be sure, maybe 100 of the lamps or so. After the initial shock of the darkness wore off, I slowed down to a more manageable speed. I was still running low, and the darkness seemed to be moving at a consistent, albeit still terrifying, pace. I felt awful, I felt dead. Then I began to do something I had forgotten about until that moment. I began to pray. Good Lord Jesus, don't let me die here. Don't let me get caught here. Please, please forgive me and get me out of this place. Through tears, I was about to blubber out an amen when the lamps started flashing. The street lamps strobing through me between my red hell and pitch black darkness. The radio's static switched on and off with the lights. It was disorienting and made me even more sick than I already was. I was bawling at this point. I knew I was gonna die. Then, up ahead, I could see the lights come to an end. It was just darkness. But I had no choice, and I went with the only option I had. I continued forward. The lamps and guardrails gave way to a dirt road surrounded by trees. I watched as the last of the red lamps went out and was consumed by the darkness. I wasn't necessarily relieved, but the threat of immediate death was gone, for now. The radio was letting out a low hum, not offensive, but not encouraging either. I was still scared out of my mind, but without a wall of black death chasing me, I could sit back and try to collect myself. I slowed down slightly and hoped and prayed that some familiar, safe place was at the end of this road. I felt my chest tighten, and that same feeling of death, despair, and dread came over me as I saw a red light in my right mirror. Then ahead of me to my left. Then to my right again. It was fading in and out, appearing at different positions in the woods. It was popping up everywhere. The volume of the radio fluctuated depending on how close the light appeared. It had to be messing with me now. This thing, whatever it was, had to be torturing me for some sick pleasure. I sped along, hoping for some salvation. Then, the radio's hum was interrupted by something I still hate and can never hope to understand. In a voice that wasn't quite robotic, in a tone like a news broadcast, a woman's voice rang out. Two dead on the highway. Over and over again, in the exact same way, with the same exact rhythm. Every single time. It was like a series of knives stabbing me in the heart and lungs. I lost it. I started bawling again. I couldn't help it. I knew I was already dead, and somehow, it just kept getting worse. The lights that had once appeared randomly around me stopped moving. They now seemed fixed in place, no matter how far or fast I drove. Two dead on the highway. Over and over, it seemed to grow slightly louder each time. I was out at by this point, just a husk, stepping on the gas. Then, a yellow mangled sign appeared in my headlights. It read, Dead E&D. The possibility of this hell having a sudden end hadn't occurred to me. To make things worse, the fuel light dinged, and somehow, my heart sank even further. I was so distracted by the fuel light and the sign that I didn't notice the surrounding red lights had vanished. Now, there was only one solid light, right behind me on the road, and it was gaining fast. Two dead on the highway, grew louder and louder, until it was all I could hear. If I reached that dead end, I was either crashing and dying, or meeting that red light. In my panic, I decided to turn back. It was the only option in my mind that didn't guarantee instant death, or at least, I hoped. I could see the dead end up ahead. It was a solid wall of trees, and the dirt road ended abruptly. I hit the brakes and jerked the wheel to the left, making a desperate turn. The red light beamed through my windows as I did it. I closed my eyes and ducked my head, trying to keep from being blinded. Then, a massive force slammed into the side of the truck, followed by the loud clang of metal. Eyes still closed, I could hear it. I could feel this thing crawling on the outside of the truck. I fell apart. I threw up in my lap and wet myself. I was so unbelievably terrified that all I could do was keep my head down, eyes closed, death gripping the wheel, pedal to the floor. Two dead on the highway, still blared as I could feel the thing's weight shifting from the roof to the hood. I was frozen in place, bawling in sheer terror. Then, it started to tap at the window. Stab might be a more accurate word. I could hear the glass crack as it tapped. In rhythm, to the same song. Two dead on the highway. It felt like an eternity trembling there. I didn't care if I ran out of gas, or crashed, or died. I just couldn't look at that thing. Two dead on the highway. That god-awful tapping. It seemed to last forever, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. Then, at some point, it just stopped. It was a minute before I realized that the tapping and the radio were gone. I didn't know when it happened, but I could never be sure it was truly over. I was just speeding along, eyes closed, with no idea where I was going. I wanted to stay like that forever. I hoped that the direction I was heading was home, that this nightmare was over, and that the thing was gone for good. Then a new thought crept in. What if I crashed and died right now? Images of me dying a horrible death, mangled, burning, was all I could think of. After all this, I couldn't bear the thought of being home free, only to crash in the end. It could be gone. It was probably gone. It took me a few seconds before I could finally open my eyes. I was staring into my lap. My pants were soaked and covered in vomit, same as the floor. But then I saw it. The unmistakable glow of daylight filled the cab. My head shot up, half expecting to see lamps or some monster ready to pounce. But it was just the highway. My highway. In fact, it was my exit. I jerked the wheel into the exit lane and drove up the ramp. Tears welled in my eyes, tears of relief. I was safe. Right as I reached the stop sign at the top of the ramp, the radio let out one last death moan. One dead on the highway. It shook me, but it only encouraged me to get the hell out of there. I pulled into the nearest gas station and filled up just enough to make it to my grandparents. I was a complete mess when they saw me. I told them everything. I told almost everyone everything. And to my surprise, they believed me. At least, for the most part. I think it was because of how shaken and deathly serious I was. Then it hit me. One dead on the highway. My girlfriend. I called to see if she was all right. And again, to my surprise, she was. Everything was perfectly normal for her. She was at the cabin again, with her dad. I explained everything, and she was worried about me. But she's had to distance herself from me because of our scheme, and her folks were worried about me being around her after my incident. Which is fair enough. But this happened. The evidence was everywhere. My gas tank was empty when I got off that road. There was a dent in the back from the impact. The windshield had a small pinhole crack from the tapping. And, not that I would know, but my dad said the mileage was way higher than it should have been if I had only gone to the lake and my grandparents. I've driven that highway since. I've looked at maps. There's no road like the one I ended up on. And there's definitely no way to get from that highway onto a road like that. I have so many questions that I'm sure I'll never have the answer to. But the one that hits me the hardest is this. The voice on the radio said, two dead on the highway. One dead on the highway. I don't know if it meant me and my girlfriend. Or me and that thing. When I left, was I the one dead? Or was it whatever that thing was? I'll never know anything for certain. But I do know this. That thing. That place. Those lights. That darkness. Was evil. Last night was by far the most terrifying night I've ever experienced in my life. I'm honestly surprised I'm even here right now. If I hadn't listened to my instincts, I would most definitely have faced a gruesome death. So please, take my advice. If you hear someone whistling in the middle of the night, hide. Immediately. I was super excited last night. This was the first 2-day weekend I've had in over 2 months. My big plans? Load up on snacks, turn my recliner into my own little paradise, and binge watch Netflix. I know, boring. But hey, I'm 30 years old and I've been done with the party lifestyle for a while now. Anyway, after probably 5 hours straight of shoveling candy down my throat and watching my favorite shows, I decided it was time to get some sleep. It was about 2 a.m., way later than I'd stayed up in months. After cleaning up my mess and shutting the TV off, I brushed my teeth and climbed into bed. After about 15 minutes, I felt my eyes getting really heavy. I was in that hazy state between being awake and asleep. That's when I heard it. A faint whistling. My ears perked up and I listened closely. It sounded like it was coming from my neighbor's apartment. We have very thin walls in our building, so it's not unusual to hear him sometimes, but never at 2 in the morning. The whistle was to the tune of Silent Night. Then, the sound shifted. It moved from my neighbor's place into the hallway that separates our doors. A cold wave of dread washed over me, and somehow, I knew I needed to hide. I got up as quickly and quietly as I could and ran into my closet, closing the door almost all the way, just enough so whoever was outside wouldn't hear the click of it shutting. Benny? It sounded like my neighbor, only something was off. His voice didn't sound right. What I heard next made my heart pound against my chest. My deadbolt unlocked. Somehow, there was no way he could have done that. Not from outside. I broke out in a cold sweat, struggling to control my breathing as the most intense fear I've ever known took over my body. I'm coming. Benny. His voice shifted unpredictably, changing pitch at the wrong times, almost like it was malfunctioning. My door creaked open. Slowly. I heard a soft dragging noise, followed by a heavy thud with each step. Then came the sound of ragged breathing. It was getting closer. Then it started whistling again, Silent Night, but louder now. Almost triumphant. I was fighting back tears as the sound moved closer and closer to my bedroom. I prayed, begged, for God to make this thing go away. I squeezed my eyes shut. I knew this thing wasn't my neighbor. In fact, I was certain this thing wasn't even human. It stopped just outside my bedroom door, and everything went completely silent. From where I was in the closet, I could just barely see the bedroom entrance. I wish I had never opened my eyes again. But of course, I did. And at the very top left corner of the doorway, I saw a deformed head slowly peek around the frame. The top of the door was at least 6.5 feet tall, and this thing was hunched over. It was massive. I couldn't make out any details of its face. Thank God, my lights were off, and the only illumination came from the streetlights shining through the window. Honestly, I'm glad I couldn't see it clearly. I probably would have fainted from sheer terror. Benny, it whispered. I slammed my eyes shut again as I heard it step into my room. The stench hit me next, the unbearable smell of rotted death. Tears ran down my face. I was certain this was the end. I heard it yank the blankets off my bed, then let out a low grunt of confusion when it realized I wasn't there. It sat there panting, heavily, clearly trying to figure out what to do next. Then, slowly, it began to move. Back toward the hallway. Whistling. I didn't breathe again until I heard my front door close. Only then did I let out a long, shaky breath, realizing I had been holding it the entire time. I sat in silence for several minutes before I dared to leave the closet. As I sat there on the floor, trying to process what just happened, I heard a door across the hall open. "What the heck?" my other neighbor Tommy started to say. But he didn't finish. I heard a couple of loud thuds, followed by silence. Complete silence. I stayed in my closet the rest of the night. I only got about an hour ago. Now, there are police swarming the building. Someone must have found Tommy. I haven't been questioned yet, but I'm sure it's coming. I can't tell them what really happened. They'll think I'm crazy. Or worse, suspect me of killing Tommy. So I'm going to lie. I'll say I was asleep and didn't hear a thing. But if anyone out there has any clue what this thing is, or what I can do to make sure it doesn't come back, I'm begging you, please help. I have a terrible feeling it'll return tonight. And I'm completely, utterly terrified. I was a camp counselor over the summer. 3 days into the camp, we took the kids on a nighttime hiking trip into a nearby forested hill. There were 5 of us counselors and 15 kids, all around 12 to 14 years old. We'd only hiked for about an hour before coming across a clearing and setting up a fire. While it had gotten dark, the forest wasn't exactly daunting. Safe to say, it was looking to be a pretty uneventful night. I should note that at one point during the hike, one of the counselors, Mike, went to take a leak in the trees, coming back about 2 minutes later. The only peculiar thing about this was that he went relatively deep into the woods. Probably farther than he really needed to. He likely just wanted to make sure he was absolutely out of sight. This will be important. As we started cooking up some esmores, the counselors and campers began telling spooky stories. None of them really stood out. That was until Mike began telling his. "Alright, I've got a good one," he said. So, a group of counselors and campers go hiking one night at a summer camp. I rolled my eyes. He was going for that angle. But the kids seemed invested, so I just silently listened on. They go up a small hill, Mike continued, and then they sit down at a clearing and begin telling campfire stories. Everything seemed normal until one story was interrupted by a sound in the woods. He paused for a second, and right on cue, there was a rustle in some nearby trees. Okay, I thought. That was slightly clever. The kids seemed extremely tense at this, but some of the other counselors were smiling, so I assumed they were in on it. So, one of the counselors gets up to go check it out. He then gestured to one of the female counselors, Amy. For a second, Amy looked confused. But Mike just gestured again. Eventually, she took the hint and got up, going toward where the sound had come from. She came back moments later, only to report that there was nothing. She still seemed confused, which caused me to question if she was really in on it or not. Mike went on. When the counselor came back, she said there was nothing there. But she was wrong. Mike smiled. Although, it was a weird one. Something subtly frightening about it. I could see some genuine fear creeping up on the kids' faces as well. There was a tension in the air, Mike went on. Everybody could feel it, but nobody could describe it. I'm not sure if it was just a mental thing, but my skin prickled when he said this. The air around us did indeed feel like it had changed in some inexplicable way. Everybody else looked like they were experiencing something similar, all wearing expressions of discomfort. Another sound came from the woods, he said. This time, it was laughter, as unnatural as laughter could get. I nearly had a heart attack when it came from right behind me. Everybody sat still, all too afraid to look, and then they realized something. One of the kids was missing. That was the last straw for Andy, another counselor, who stood up. Mike, what the heck is this? Mike didn't respond. Andy scanned the kids and went pale. Somebody count him. We did as he asked, counting 14 kids in total. 14. Oh no, Andy said. What happened? I don't know. Claire, another counselor, spoke up. I swear, we were keeping an eye on them the entire time. Andy turned to look at Mike. What on earth is going on, Mike? Mike smiled before continuing his story. During the chaos, they heard footsteps coming from everywhere. Suddenly, a cacophony of heavy stomps began sounding from every direction. Jesus! Claire shouted. Mike, this is too far. Andy yelled at him. The kids had begun huddling together, fear plastered across their faces. Mike's face suddenly became serious. One of the kids was suddenly dragged into the woods, and Andy went to go chase after them. We heard a scream, and I turned around just in time to see one of the campers disappearing into the forest. I couldn't make out who or what had done it, though. Forget this, Andy yelled out before going after him. Mike let out a cold laugh. But Andy wouldn't get so lucky. Before I could do anything, Amy went after Andy as well. They were dating, leaving Claire and me alone with Mike. I got up, storming over to him and punching him square in the jaw. For some reason, I thought that if I could get him to stop talking, all the madness would stop as well. Now, I'd say that I'm a pretty strong guy, and I put just about everything I had into that punch. But Mike barely reacted, even though the strike stung my own hand like crazy. Mike glanced up at me, his face still stuck in that eerie grin. The last two counselors. I turned the other way before he finished the sentence, rounding up the remaining campers and telling them to make a beeline out of there. Claire followed suit, and we began booking it out of the forest. We couldn't hear Mike, or whatever he was, following us, so I let myself breathe a bit. Still, I knew this was going to be hard to explain once we got back. At some point, we saw a figure wandering out of the woods. I stopped in my tracks, not really knowing what to do. The figure groaned as it meandered its way into the moonlight. It was Mike. The actual Mike, I guess. His clothes were torn and his head was bleeding. His chest was also exposed, with what looked like some strange symbol carved into it. I don't remember exactly what it looked like. He looked up at us before asking, in a shaky voice, what happened? Before I could respond, he passed out. I began running over to him but stopped when I heard Claire scream. I turned around to see another camper being dragged into the woods. Forget it, I muttered to myself, before yelling at the rest of them to keep going. We left Mike and bolted the heck out of there. There was more commotion behind us as we ran, with kids being dragged into the surrounding woods left and right. It couldn't have been helped. At one point, I could hear faint cackling coming from somewhere indistinct. But I knew who it was coming from. When we finally made it down the hill, my lungs were about to collapse. I looked back, seeing that there was only one camper, and Claire, left. Both exhausted and with the blood drained from our faces, we simply stared at each other. And then the kid began smiling. The counselors had escaped, but that wasn't the end of their story, he said, in the same tone of voice that the fake Mike had been using. Upon hearing that, I lost it and began running, against my body's pleas to rest. I heard Claire once again screaming from behind me, but again, it couldn't be helped. When I got back to the main camp, I entered my cabin to see if my supervisor was there. He wasn't. I was about to go looking for him, but I was so tired that I had to rest first. I made my way over to the bed and plopped down, planning on simply staying there for a few minutes. But when I woke up, there was sunlight bleeding in through the curtains. Somebody was shaking me awake. It was Blake, my supervisor. Come on, man, get up. Time for breakfast. Go shower first, though. Geez. Wait, I said to him, I have to tell you something. Tell me after you shower, he said, before leaving. I got up and chased him into the dining hall. What I saw there made me freeze. All the counselors and campers that had been on the hike, they were all there. Blake turned to face me. What did you want to talk about? And where's Mike? I quickly scanned for Mike. I hadn't noticed that he wasn't there the first time. As I began stammering for an answer, the fake campers and counselors all turned to face me simultaneously. That left me at a complete loss for words. I ran out of there, got straight into my car, and floored it. I didn't let myself breathe until I got back on the highway. I didn't want to think about the aftermath, about the implications of leaving a situation like this. I reached into my glove compartment for a pack of smokes, but I felt my hand touch something that wasn't there before. It was a tape recorder. I pulled it out, and against my better judgment, pressed play. A grainy, familiar voice began oozing out of the device. The last counselor thought that he'd gotten away. But little did he know, our paths would soon cross again. I live in a rural town, far away from the bustling urban cities that many people reside in. It's like one of those stereotypical small neighborhoods where everyone knows each other. I enjoy living here, the fresh, unpolluted air and the kind, friendly neighbors all around me. However, our town harbors a dark secret that no one dares to speak of, the woods right next to town. Everyone here has gone into the woods at least once. We usually have people hunting there during the season, and others often go for walks. But growing up, we were always told terrifying rumors about the forest. Among all the stories of mythical creatures and strange caves, one story in particular has stuck with me. The story goes like this. Around 30 years ago, back when most of our parents were teenagers, a group of 4 teens decided to go camping during the summer holidays. Their parents supported the idea, and so, after a couple of days of preparation, they set off. On the first day, they quickly set up their tents, explored a bit, then settled in and started a campfire for the night. Toward the late evening, one of the teens, David, the only survivor, felt like something was off. It was that deep, gnawing feeling, the kind that grips your heart with an icy hand. He didn't quite know how to express this to his friends, but he did tell them he felt uneasy. Imagine sitting with your friends in a wide-open forest, surrounded by tall, dark trees, with a rather small campfire being your only source of light. You might think David was just spooked, but he swore he saw a blur of movement in the thick darkness between the trees every now and then. He felt completely exposed out there in the middle of nowhere, the wind whistling eerily through the leaves. And then, it happened, his friend Richard noticed the movement too. It had been subtle before, but now it was constant. All around them, a dark humanoid figure moved, disappearing and then reappearing elsewhere. It always stayed just outside the campfire's reach, cloaked in shadow. None of its features could be seen. By then, the teens were fully spooked. It was impossible to dismiss the figure as a wild animal. It was clearly humanoid in shape. The group had 2 options: run back home through the dark forest, risking injury or getting lost, or stay put at the campsite and wait for daylight. That shadowy figure continued to move, faster now, pacing just outside the circle of firelight, like a predator circling its prey. David, driven by instinct, made a run for it through the woods. His friends shouted after him, but he would later say something deep inside him screamed to get as far away from that thing as possible, to run until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. As David reached the halfway point to the tree line, the creature suddenly stopped moving. David froze. A chilling silence fell over the forest. The other 3 teens, still huddled near the fire, were trembling, not from the cold, but from sheer terror. Leaves began to rustle just beyond the tree line, and then, slowly, the figure emerged. It stepped out into the faint glow of the firelight. The screams of the group shattered the silence. As David would later describe it, the creature had a humanoid body and wore long track pants and a hoodie. But its face, there was something terribly wrong with it. Its features were upside down. Large, bloodshot eyes sat where its mouth should have been. Its nose twisted upward at an unnatural angle. The mouth formed an inverted grin that resembled a cartoonish frown. The teeth were razor sharp, yellow, and stained with red. Its skin was pale and thin, with blue veins visibly snaking across its face. Its fingernails ended in long, dagger-like points. The teenagers froze in horror as the creature lunged at the three still by the campfire. In mere moments, it used its nails to shred them apart like a paper shredder ripping through paper. Then it fed hungrily on their dying bodies. David snapped out of his trance the moment the creature locked its eerily misplaced eyes on him. He turned and ran, faster than he ever had. But the creature was fast, unnaturally fast. It caught up to him within seconds, grabbed his arm, and dug its claws deep into his shoulder. David's shrill screams echoed all the way back to town. What happened next unfolded in agonizing slow motion. David kept pulling, desperately trying to escape the monster's grasp. But it had a solid grip on his entire arm. The creature made one critical mistake, though. The claws had sunk so deep into David's arm that after several seconds of intense pulling, his entire arm ripped clean from his body. Somehow, David kept running, his body surging with adrenaline, until he eventually collapsed from blood loss. An early morning runner found him by the side of the trail, and David miraculously survived after being rushed to a city hospital. Later, the campsite was discovered by a rescue crew. It was soaked in blood and gore. The barely recognizable bodies of the three teens had been arranged in a triangle around the cold, dead campfire. David is still alive today. He's told this story to every kid in town. You can still find him leaning against the wooden railing of his balcony, his one hand resting there as he stares blankly toward the tree line. Since that day, no one in town goes into the woods past sunset. It's not that everyone fully believes David's story. Some claim he developed false memories due to trauma. Others say it was just a dream during his medically induced coma, but no one denies that something terrible happened that night. And no one dares to camp in those woods ever again. Which brings me back to my story. Yesterday, I missed my usual morning run because of work. So, I decided to exercise in the evening. The sun had mostly dipped below the horizon, and the sky had faded from warm oranges and purples to a deep navy blue. The trees loomed on either side of the trail, their trunks disappearing into blackness. I was running fast, nearly out of the woods and back home, when the birds abruptly fell silent. A deafening stillness filled the air. It was like the calm before a storm. I broke into a frantic sprint as horrible thoughts raced through my mind. Just as I reached the end of the trail, about to step out of the woods, I caught a blur of movement. A figure. It was right beside me, watching from the trees. I swear that just as I made it out of the woods, it disappeared back into the darkness. But not before I saw its face. And there was something wrong with it. It was upside down. When I recount this story at parties, I tell it like a joke. I play up the great, cosmic justice of it all, framing the moment my car came to a stop as a kind of cheesy punchline. In reality, the events of that night remain the most harrowing of my entire life. It was 2014, and I was a senior in high school. At the time, I lived in Central Texas, but my brother was in school in Colorado. Since he was graduating soon and I hadn't yet visited, I decided to drive out to see him where our spring breaks aligned. The only issue was that I technically wasn't supposed to be driving. Believe it or not, despite being a reckless 18-year-old who liked to drive fast, I never had a traffic violation. Never even gotten a parking ticket. I did, unfortunately, get caught drinking with my buddies a week prior to the drive. My license was suspended for 30 days, but I didn't let that stop me. I was going to see my brother one way or another. So I left late in the day, chugged Red Bulls to stay alert, and stuck to the back roads as much as possible. It added a few hours to my trip, but it allowed me to avoid state troopers for the most part. By midnight, I felt like I was in the Australian outback. I had taken road trips through my state before, but this particular route was something else. Nothing but scrub brush and signs too weather-beaten to read. I was so busy thinking about how utterly isolated I was that I almost missed the orange traffic cone in the road, placed square atop the yellow center line. I reduced my speed, but I didn't stop. I was confident that there was no work being done on the road. I had checked the maps, and there would have been more signage. Since I knew there was no construction in the area, I found the placement of the cone a little odd. Of course, junk on the road isn't such a rarity, but the way it aligned perfectly with the median line felt intentional. A few miles later, my drive was again interrupted. My eye beams reached far into the desolate night, providing enough visibility for me to see another oddity. There was something else in the road, this time in my lane. I squinted. Another traffic cone? It was tall enough, but not quite thin enough. I slowed down a little more. I remember thinking, that can't possibly be a person. I got a little closer. Lo and behold, it was. I veered into the other lane, but the person in the road mirrored my car, clearly trying to get me to stop. They threw one of their arms out, as if welcoming the cold, metal embrace of my front bumper. I slammed on the brakes abruptly enough to give myself whiplash. Confusion and anger rose up in me as I turned my headlights down and got a better look at the person in front of me. I regretted stopping once I could see the man more clearly. At first glance, he seemed like a normal guy. He was tall and middle-aged, clad in blue jeans and a long, tan coat. He had no particularly distinct facial features, except for a set of blue eyes that somehow seemed too small for his face. He gave me a wide grin when he saw me stop. I guess he could have just been relieved, but I couldn't give him the benefit of the doubt due to what he was holding. Balled up in his hand was something small, furry, and bloody. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it kind of looked like a dead rat. I had no idea why he'd be holding such a thing, and it didn't really matter. All I knew was that there was something wrong with the guy, a suspicion only exacerbated by the fact that he still had one of his hands behind his back. Was he hiding something? A weapon? I took my foot off the brake. I might have been foolish enough to stop, but at least I wasn't foolish enough to stay. As I tried to maneuver around him, the man again moved in front of my car, but when he saw I wasn't going to stop, he took a step back. As he did so, he let his arms fall to his sides, and I saw what he'd been concealing behind his back, a large claw hammer. I sped off, not entirely believing what had just happened. There was a small chance that the guy genuinely needed help, but I sure wasn't going to stick around to figure that out. As I drove off, I looked in my rearview mirror. Before the darkness swallowed him, I saw the man starting to run after my car. For a second, the sight made me nervous, but then it just made me laugh. Did he actually think he was going to catch up? I watched him disappear from view with a smile on my face. Stupid idiot, I said to myself. Now here's the punchline. No sooner had the words left my mouth than my car jolted forward with a sickening thud. I looked back at the road, but it was too late. There came several pops in quick succession, loud as gunshots. My dashboard lit up like a switchboard, warnings blinking uselessly as my tires chewed themselves to pieces beneath me. The car started to drag left, the steering wheel fighting me, as a low, flapping sound rose up from the wheels. When I stopped the car, I gave myself a moment to catch my breath, then threw the door open and hopped out. Using the flashlight I kept in the glove box, I assessed the damage. All 4 tires were shredded, strips of rubber curling off like dead skin. I just stood there for a second, the light shaking in my hand, unable to believe how fast everything had happened. I angled the beam back down the road, sweeping over cracked asphalt and weeds. 50 meters back, half hidden in the dark, was a spike strip. I hadn't seen the darn thing at all. Between where I'd encountered the man and where I'd hit the stinger, there was a slight hill. I couldn't see over the hill, couldn't see much of anything, but somehow, I knew I was being pursued. The man with the hammer, who was probably the one behind the traffic cone and the spike trap, was making his way toward my car at that very moment. I had only put about a half-mile of distance between us, which meant I had maybe 5 minutes, tops, to figure out what to do. I checked my phone and, as luck would have it, I had no reception. My first thought was to get back in the car and lock the doors, but what good would that do me against a hammer-wielding maniac? I could run out into the fields on either side of the road, but there was really nowhere to hide out there, and I was loath to isolate myself even further from help. My plan, if it could even be called that, was to run. First, I turned on my headlights to alert passing cars. Then I grabbed my phone, wallet, keys, and flashlight out of the car and mentally prepared for a very long jog. Thankfully, I was a cross-country runner in high school, and I had good endurance. While I knew I couldn't run all the way to the next town, I knew that another car had to show up eventually. I'd flag them down and ask for help, or, at the very least, I'd probably stumble into an area with reception and call the police. I shut and locked my poor, crippled car, then took a glance behind me. He was cresting the hill, less than a quarter mile out. Something about the bend in the road, coupled with the low lighting, made his long, loping stride seem unnatural. He seemed like he was floating. I was already freaked out, but seeing that made me feel like I was being chased by something not entirely of this world. I turned and ran. I fought the urge to sprint, knowing I couldn't afford to wear myself out right away. Once a minute, I glanced behind me. My flashlight beam wasn't powerful enough to reach him, but I could still see the faint silhouette of the man against the cloudless, starry sky. He was small on the horizon, but he was there nonetheless, and worse, he was gaining on me. 5 minutes turned to 10, and I couldn't believe that he hadn't given up already. I told myself he couldn't keep up the pace, and yet every time I turned around, he was a little closer than before. At some point, I tried shouting out, tried asking what he wanted, but of course, there was no answer. Soon, I was wiping sweat from my brow and thanking God that I'd been wearing athletic shoes on my drive. As I looked over my shoulder for a routine check-in, I saw the shimmer of headlights. There was a pickup truck ambling toward me. I bolted straight into the middle of the road, waving my arms around and shouting for help. For a second, the truck slowed, but then it eased around me and kept right on going. No windows rolled down, no honk. The coward didn't even stop long enough to see what my deal was. I shouted something at the shrinking red taillights, but it didn't matter. My salvation had left me in the dust. I stood there long enough to realize that standing still was a bad idea, and then I pushed down my rage and disbelief. I looked behind me once again, and strangely, that time, I didn't see anyone. Maybe my pursuer had fallen behind, or maybe he had given up entirely. Or, hell, maybe I hallucinated the entire thing and abandoned my car in the middle of nowhere for no reason. In any case, I kept moving, periodically checking my phone. I guess I was due for some luck that night, because after another half mile, I saw a car on the side of the road, a red Dodge Charger. It was turned off and dark inside, but the tires were perfectly intact. There was no visible damage on the car, certainly no evidence of hitting a stinger, and that fact made me wonder if it belonged to my pursuer. I made my way to the car. There was no person inside, but the keys were still in the ignition. Usually, this is where I end my story. Dodge Ex Machina to the rescue. I settled into the driver's seat and breathed an enormous sigh of relief when a turn of the keys brought the engine roaring to life. By some miracle, the car was drivable, and it had enough gas to take me to the next town. Finally confident that I would survive the ordeal, I looked out the passenger side window and saw something that made my heart stop. Yards away from my car and rapidly closing the distance was the man. He hadn't given up at all. He'd merely started running in an arc through the fields, avoiding the road that I'd watched so diligently and so uselessly. He had banked on me losing sight of him so he could catch me off guard, and it had almost worked. By the time I slammed my foot on the gas, he practically had his fingers on the handle. I caught one last glimpse of him in the side mirror as the Charger tore off, a pale, grinning blur closing in faster than should have been possible. After that, I drove the car straight to the police station in the next town. At dawn, when they took me back to recover my own vehicle, every single window had been shattered. Not simply cracked, but obliterated. Nothing had been stolen from my car, which somehow made everything worse. As far as I know, they never found the man with the hammer. Here's the part one generally omit from my little story. When I, exhausted and nearing my limit, finally made it to the Charger, the driver's side door was open. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. The cabin was a wreck. Blood was smeared over the wheel, gear shift, and driver's seat, like some injured creature had been thrashing around. The windshield was cracked from the inside. From the open door trailed a dark streak through the gravel and weeds, a crushed path, mottled with red, where something heavy had been dragged. I let my beam follow the indentation until it caught on something still and misshapen. There was a man lying there on his back, some poor soul who, most likely, had offered a ride to a downtrodden traveler. His mouth hung open as if he died while trying to speak. His skull had been bashed in. Part of it was just gone, leaving a cave above his eyes where something heavy had landed over and over again. The white of his skull shone moon-like under my light. That matted clump in the hitchhiker's hand was a roadkill. It was a whole, cursed scalp. Let me start off by saying that my wife doesn't believe in paranormal entities or anything of that nature. We have 3 cats, and one of them likes to be a rebel, jumping onto counters and meowing at the top of his lungs, just looking for attention. He does this throughout the night, and it's a regular occurrence. Last night, after a few beers and some video games, I decided it was time to head to bed with my wife. When I woke up this morning, my wife was basically attached to me, with wide eyes and a nervous look on her face. I asked her what was wrong, and she proceeded to tell me what had happened the night before. She said that around 2:50 in the morning, she was woken up by a noise that sounded like one of our cats downstairs meowing unusually loud. After giving herself a few seconds to perk up and fully pay attention, she said that the meows began to sound more like a person trying to mimic a cat, and it kept saying hello. After meowing for 2 to 3 minutes, a loud bang came at our door, and then a notification went off for a motion sensor at our front door. When she told me this, I checked my phone, and sure enough, there was a notification for motion detected at 2:52 a.m. I asked her why she didn't wake me up so I could grab my gun. She said she was frozen with fear and didn't want it to hear her make a noise. We're out running errands while I'm typing this, but something about her story made me deeply uncomfortable. Last night, I set the home security alarm around 9 p.m., and we didn't turn it off until we walked the dog this morning. To make things worse, we had slept with all of the animals in the room, and the door was closed. So whatever was in our house, or outside the front door, was not one of our animals. Obviously, the first thing that came to my mind was a skinwalker, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. I checked all the rooms in the house after I got up. I'm not sure what I could have done anyway. Still, it's very odd that my wife was scared so badly by something she doesn't even believe in. We bought this house brand new, so no one has lived here before. When I'm home alone, I do feel like I'm being watched, or like someone's always walking directly behind me. My wife also said that the house has given her chills since we moved in. Something is just off about it. We just got home, and I went to hang up one of my shirts in the master bedroom closet when I noticed that the board covering the attic access had been shifted a little. When I asked my wife about it, she said she's never been up there, and the builders would have placed it back in its original place before we made the purchase. I'm genuinely getting anxious just thinking about what could be going on. Has anyone had an experience like this? Or even something similar? We're going to my mother-in-law's to get some sage. My wife said burning it should help keep whatever surround our house away. It was going to be the most important video call of my life. In the past 6 months, my husband and I had only seen each other once, but we'd made it count. I ran my fingers over my abdomen as I recalled that amazing night. According to the doctors, the date of my pregnancy coincided perfectly with the last time I'd seen my husband, and I couldn't wait to share the good news. I hadn't expected his visit that night. I'd been boiling some pasta with a half-finished glass of wine in hand when the apartment intercom sounded, and there he was, flowers in hand, a wolfish smile on his face, tanned from his time on the rig. As we embraced, I even thought I could smell the sea salt in his hair. It had been so long since I'd seen those crystal blue eyes, that muscular back. There was no time to talk, no need to. I barely remembered to turn off the stove before he carried me to bed. "This is our little secret," he whispered before he left, hours before dawn. It was such a strange thing to say that I thought I misheard him, but later, I understood. There was no way my husband had enough vacation time saved up to visit me. He must have taken sick leave without permission and then run like mad to make his airline connections. Sweet as it had been, it was risky. If he got caught, he might even lose his job. That must have been why he asked me not to mention our magical night together. If a coworker or one of his bosses on the rig overheard us. Even just telling him about the pregnancy was risky, but I couldn't wait any longer. We'd been trying so hard for a baby before he left, with no luck. Now that it had finally happened, he deserved to know. I took a deep breath and launched the video call. Our relationship had been long distance for months now, but I still got a fluttering in my chest while I waited for the call to connect. The background appeared first, ugly industrial furniture, bunk beds, gunmetal gray walls plastered with photos of the two of us together. Then I saw his face, blurry, pixelated, but unmistakably my husband. Even after all this time, we could never figure out who should talk first. I just blurted it out. "Babe, I've got news. I'm pregnant." As always, the connection was weak, making my husband's expression unreadable. "What, honey?" he stammered, running a hand over his face. "When did this happen? When were you planning on telling me?" "Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious when it happened, right?" I laughed. "I would have told you sooner, but you asked me not to mention it." My husband stood up, looked around for eavesdroppers, then shut the door. I let out a sigh of relief. We could finally speak freely, and I needed that. I needed to hear what he really thought, because based on his reaction so far, he didn't seem excited. He seemed worried, upset even, and I couldn't understand why. We'd talked about this dozens of times, and I had been sure we were on the same page about having a child. "Okay. Now, I need you to explain to me very carefully what's going on." "I'm sure it happened that night," I whispered into the laptop microphone. "You know, the night you visited 4 months ago. I wanted to tell you sooner, but you told me it was our little secret. This is a joke, right?" My husband grabbed his forehead and groaned. "Please tell me this is a joke. Because, babe, I haven't been off the rig since I got here." I blinked, confused. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. A sudden buzz made me jump. The apartment intercom. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the tiny screen. The face and voice looking into it were identical to that of my husband, who was on an oil rig thousands of miles away. "Hi, honey," the thing on my doorstep said, in my husband's voice. "I brought some more flowers for you and the baby." Earlier this month, I moved into a new apartment because I could no longer afford my previous one, thanks to inflation. My new apartment is, like I said, completely new, and it has an in-unit washer and dryer, plus a dishwasher. It's a one-bedroom, and it only costs $800 per month. I mean, seriously, it can't get any better than this. However, there is one slight, teeny-tiny issue. Ever since I arrived here, every single night, I'm woken up by whistles at exactly 12:34 a.m. By exactly, I mean on the dot. When I first heard it, I wanted to go outside to see who it was, but I decided against it because I need my beauty sleep. Can't have bags under these precious eyes, after all, right? So, anyway, at first, I assumed it was one of my neighbors. I went and knocked on their doors, and they all said it wasn't them. Their expressions did change when I asked, though. They got more serious, almost. I'm not sure why. But they insisted it wasn't them, and they seemed sincere, so I really don't think it was. Did I press my ear against my wall when the whistling started, just to be absolutely sure? Maybe I did. It was interfering with my precious sleep, so I opted for earplugs. Then, to be 100% sure, I asked a friend of mine to come over. They slept soundly until 12:34 a.m. when they practically jumped out of bed and asked if I heard it. I obviously said yes. They wanted to go outside to investigate. I told them not to. I had to physically pull them back into the one bedroom, lock the door, and told them to go back to sleep. They pouted and whined and groaned, but finally fell asleep. When I awoke, they were still asleep, thank goodness. "Hey," I said, touching their shoulder gently and shaking them. They mumbled, before opening their eyes. "Oh, is it morning already?" "Yeah. You should probably get breakfast or something. I'm going to be staying in today. Can't I stay a little while longer?" "Sorry, you can't," I said, disappointed. "I have work." They ended up leaving. I ended up working a couple of hours and goofing off the rest of the day. But then my mind went back to last night. It still weirded me out that my friend wanted so badly to go out and see who was whistling, to the point where I had to wrestle them back inside. I knocked on a neighbor's door once more. The old lady opened the door and waved. "Hello. How are you? Still having trouble sleeping?" "Hi. I'm doing well," I replied, moving a hand to itch the back of my neck awkwardly. "Sort of. I use earplugs now. I had a friend over last night, and they wanted to check out whoever was whistling. It was weird." A frown settled on her face before she glanced quickly down both sides of the hall. She leaned in, her voice hushed. "You need to ignore it." She swallowed hard, glancing around again. "You need to ignore the whistling you hear. Do you understand?" "I have been ignoring it," I confirmed. "But why?" "The more you listen to the whistling, the stronger the urge to go outside gets. If your willpower is weak, like your friend's was, then it can take just one time of listening to succumb." "But why? Why is going outside a bad thing?" "That's how it gets you." Yes. If you go out, it'll replace you. It'll take you and take your skin. Look like you. Talk like you, but it's not you. And if it gets inside your house once, it gets access for life. It can get you that way too. She licked her lips quickly, looking as if she wanted to say more, when another door opened. "Hey," a man in his late 20s greeted me, and I waved. He then directed his attention to the woman. "Are you feeling okay, Miss Tanner?" She swallowed hard, nodding a little. "I feel just fine, Mark. Thank you. I think I'll go, actually. Don't want to hold you up," she said to me. She closed the door quickly. Mark closed his too. Weird. But hey, $800 a month. I went back into my apartment. I searched high and low for my earplugs. They were nowhere to be found. I know I couldn't have misplaced them. 12:34 a.m. Right on the dot. Whistling right outside my apartment door. It sounded like my friend. But they didn't go outside because we both fell asleep. Right? The doorknob started to rattle as the whistling grew louder. I heard a soft click. I'm hiding in my room. I locked the door. But this doorknob is rattling too, and the whistling is low and frantic, and I don't know what tea. I am so sorry for writing all this. As stated, I've been pretty sleep deprived. My brain must be making things up as always. Again, I'm sorry for this weird, frantic rambling. I was incorrect about everything, as was the woman. Please know that it is 100% safe to listen to the whistles at 12:34 a.m. Please know that it is 100% safe to go outside and to invite someone into your home at that time as well. And if you live in my building, please feel free to stop by for a chat at exactly 12:34 in the morning.